Romantic Tales. Chapter 211. Originally, it was very difficult for Hellion Vivian to leave the White Academy in the past. Firstly, she did not have the authority. Secondly, after she was driven out by her family, those teachers had always looked down on her. In addition, her master, Grandmaster Zizun, was not around recently. If she wanted to ask for leave, she even had to write the reason why she wanted to do something. Now it was different. The leave in her hands was won by the Academy's examination. No one would ask where she went and what she did down the mountain. Therefore, after returning to the White Academy again, Hellion Vivian did not go to class unlike ordinary people, which made everyone think that she was shocked. After all, a person who only knew how to do martial arts but did not understand what martial chi was, appearing in class at this time was indeed very awkward. Some people even suspected that Hellion Wei simply did not understand the principles that the teacher was talking about. That was why she took the initiative to give up on the lessons during this period of time, so that everyone would not be able to take care of her when they were practicing martial chi. After hearing this news, the Hellion Jiaoer coldly snorted. She is quite self-aware this time. As she spoke, she instructed the servant girl below. In the future, there is no need to inquire about this little bitch anymore. Mother is right, I was too short-sighted in the past. Being serious with an ugly woman like her is simply lowering my own taste. Let her fiddle with her pile of scrap iron in her dreams. No matter how well she does it, she won't be able to sell a single piece, let alone participate in the martial chi competition. Go and see when Mother will be back and help me ask about the current situation of Profound Heaven. Yes. The servant girl saw that her miss was in a good mood, and her attitude also followed suit. Miss wants to get an armament from Profound Heaven before the martial chi competition? The Hellion Jiaoer nodded, that small face with arrogance. Father should have already set up a connection for me. Now I am just waiting for Mother to come back. The servant girl took the opportunity to flatter. You are really worthy of being Miss. This servant heard that the armament of Profound Heaven is very difficult to get. Few of the young ladies in the capital can get it. Father's connections are naturally not weak. Hellion Jiaoer blew on her freshly dyed red hair and coolly glanced at her. What's more, those people who only rely on their families to get ahead, how can they compare to me? The servant girl smiled. Mrs. Wright. Presumably, the boss of Profound Heavens heard of your reputation in the capital and knew that he had offended you in Armament City. He wanted to give Miss an armament to atone for his crime. You can say that in front of me, but don't say that in front of outsiders. Although Hellion Jiaoer was scolding her, her face was full of pride. The maidservant lowered her eyes. Young miss, don't worry. I know that those people outside are jealous of you. I won't say such words outside. If you were to meet someone like the eldest miss who had evil intentions, what kind of trouble would it cause? It's good that you understand. The Hellion Jiaoer leaned back and reclined on the sandalwood chair. She looked like she had already obtained the Profound Heavens armament. The servant girl smiled again and fawningly handed her a cup of tea. Her every move was subservient. She breathed a sigh of relief, thinking that the young miss had finally returned to normal. During this time, because of the eldest miss, the young miss's mood had never been good. In the end, the ones who suffered were the servants. However, the eldest miss was also too much. Why did she like to jump around in front of the young miss so much? Now that something big happened, she was beaten back to her original state. She probably also felt that her martial chi was not good enough, so she found a place to hide. As the servant girl thought, she looked at the Hellion Jiaoer's face. Seeing that she seemed to be asleep, she gently put down the fan in her hand and also took a nap. However, they didn't know that at this moment, Hellion Vivian was sitting on the second floor of Profound Heaven's No. 1 shop. She was dressed in men's clothing and holding a paper umbrella. She stood with her back to the light, making the servant who came to greet her very puzzled. This guest, our steward, is out today. We don't know when he will be back. Would you like to come back another day? The servant who was doing chores was very polite and his tone was gentle. This was the recruitment policy of Profound Heavens. No matter how good the other party was, Hellion Vivian's first rule was to choose a servant who could make the customer feel good. Therefore, the reason why Profound Heaven's business was so good was not without reason. Hellion Vivian turned around and looked at him. Her thin lips slightly curved. I'll wait for a while. The servant was stunned. Obviously, he was stunned by the person in front of him. He had never seen anyone who looked so gorgeous. At this time, Hellion Wei had regained her appearance. She was wearing a long robe with a golden border and clouds inlaid with 1-inch wide roses. Her beautiful hair was lazily draped over her ears. Her jet black hair was alluring. She was not dressed very neatly, but her figure was graceful and graceful. Her posture was elegant, her complexion was magnificent, and her aura was like the moon. Under the golden sunset, her straight and slender legs were more beautiful than a model's, especially when her red sleeves floated in the air and she held a folded umbrella in her hand. The servant thought that he had seen a fairy from the sky. He was a little confused and stood there in a daze. He began to wonder which family this young lady was from. How could she be born with such a bewitching appearance? Yes, although Hellion Vivian was wearing men's clothing. But the shrewd servant still saw her gender, so he was even more confused. He knew a lot of people in the capital, but he had never seen anyone who was more outstanding than this person in front of him. Strangely, he had never seen this person before. No one in the capital had ever mentioned such a person. While the servant was puzzled, he saw the carriages of the 4 stewards appear in front of the shop. The servant was shocked. Usually only 1 or 2 stewards came to the shop. Why were all 4 stewards here today? Could it be that the second boss was coming? That's not right. The second boss sent a message the day before yesterday, saying that his father had been very strict recently and was forcing him to get married. He disliked that he was always hanging around outside, so he was grounded in the backyard. He said that he would only be released in 2 days. Then what could have happened for all 4 of the stewards to come? The servant thought for a moment. He could no longer care about the guests behind him. He quickly tidied his collar and hurriedly ran downstairs. Unexpectedly, before he could speak, Steward Zhang asked him, "Is someone looking for this old man today?" "Yes." The servant quickly responded and followed Steward Zhang to look around. "Where is that person?" Strangely, Steward Zhang, who had always been calm, sounded a little anxious. The servant pointed upstairs. "That guest is still waiting in the private room on the 2nd floor. "On the 2nd floor?" Steward Zhang clenched his teeth. "Why did you arrange for him to be on the 2nd floor? Chapter 212. The servant thought to himself, "It wasn't me who arranged this. It was that person who entered the building as if it was her own home. She entered the private room as if she was familiar with the place. She knew the layout better than him. The 2nd floor it is." Manager Zhang lifted his robe and hurriedly walked upstairs. As he walked, he said, "Go and bring me the best armament parts and the accounts of the store for the past 2 days. The servant exclaimed, "Look at it now. Look at it now." As Manager Zhang spoke, he had already pushed open the door. After seeing that familiar figure, he smiled with relief. "Big boss, you're finally here." "Big boss." The servant looked up in shock. His eyes flashed with unconcealable astonishment. This person turned out to be the elusive big boss of Profound Heaven. The servant obviously didn't dare to believe it. He glanced at Hellion Vivian again. Wait a minute, he needed time to cool down. Their big boss wasn't a man, wasn't a mighty and majestic man. Instead, it was a young girl who looked less than 20 years old. What happened to the back of a tiger and the waist of a bear? What happened to the white-haired old man? What happened to the reclusive master? What happened to the man who had never shown his face because of his ugly appearance? Their big boss clearly only relied on her face to win against many people. Uncle Zhang. Hellion Vivian smiled. She reached out and shook hands with Manager Zhang. Then she glanced at the servant. The servant was dazed. He thought that this voice was also very pleasant to hear. Manager Zhang slapped the back of the servant's head. "Why are you still in a daze? Hurry up and prepare the things I just asked you to bring." After he finished speaking, he smiled at Hellion Vivian. "This is this old servant's new disciple. He just entered the store and is not familiar with it." Hellion Vivian smiled. "Very good. We can hang him in the store as a mascot." The servant suddenly felt like he was in a dream. Was he just praised by his idol? No, after getting the accounts, he must go downstairs and run a few laps. Steward Zhang looked at his own subordinate going downstairs foolishly, helplessly shook his head and said to Hellion Wei Wei, "As soon as this old servant received the boss's letter, this old servant rushed back from outside. Only, I don't know what the boss meant by making a profit." "Old Zhang, that's enough. Our brothers haven't all arrived yet and you want to trick the boss into giving you lessons." The burly manager Wei walked up. Wei Wei saw that all of her capable subordinates had arrived. Only then did she put away the umbrella in her hand, her eyes shining. You should all know that the armaments test is about to begin. Compared to other armaments, our business is indeed not bad. However, compared to what I expected, it's still a bit worse. That's why, starting today, we need to change our business philosophy. From now on, the only thing we need to do is to build momentum. Build momentum? Steward Wei was a little confused. Profound Heavens is currently flourishing. Those people are squeezing their heads and trying to order an armament from our guild. Who in the entire capital city doesn't know about Profound Heavens? They are no different from country bumpkins. Hellion Vivian put down the umbrella in her hand. Although the action was light because of the excellent armament, it changed the surrounding airflow. This is not enough. This is not enough. Manager Wei stared and turned to look at Manager Zhang. Even the calm and steady Manager Zhang couldn't understand Hellion Vivian's meaning. He could only wait for Hellion Vivian's next words. Hellion Vivian's slender fingers tapped on the table. When she looked up, the sun was setting. Outside the large French windows, it was as if the entire evening had become her foil. Big boss, is this okay? Manager Zhang took out a pure silver card and gave it to Hellion Vivian. Hellion Vivian took it and looked at it. Her beautiful fingers twirled around and the corners of her mouth slightly curved. Not bad. When you give it to everyone, make sure that it's real money. Tell them that here identity and whatnot are of no use. Yes. Manager Zhang slightly lowered his head. To be honest, he completely didn't think that this kind of card would be bought by people. But the situation was beyond his imagination. Now the whole capital was talking about the silver card. In their eyes, this kind of silver card had already become a symbol of noble status. Chapter 213. It was night and the moonlight was getting darker. Outside the window one could see the mountains and trees. The steward of the general's residence was holding a lantern outside the door in the middle of the night. He looked left and right as if he was waiting for someone, looking very mysterious. When he saw the carriage coming, he hurriedly held the lantern and went up to it. Madam. It turned out that the person who rushed back in the middle of the night was none other than Su Yenemo, who was ordered by the retired emperor to stay in the Hidden Spirit Temple to abstain from meat and pray. This trip to the Hidden Spirit Temple not only caused her to lose a maidservant for no reason, but she also lost 70 to 80% of her face. If it weren't for her husband's family having a say in the imperial court, she really would have stayed in the Hidden Spirit Temple for 10 days to half a month. But even if it was only 3 days, it was enough to make Su Yenemo vomit a ball of anger in her heart. She glanced at the steward coldly. What about the thing I asked you to do? Don't worry, madam, I have already made arrangements. Recently, Profound Heavens is doing some kind of VIP card distribution. I have already made an appointment with the steward there. Tomorrow madam will be able to bring Miss there. You will definitely be able to buy a good armament. The steward held the lantern for Su Yenemo while waiting at her beck and call. Su Yenemo nodded in satisfaction and said, What has that little bastard been doing recently? Eldest Miss doesn't have the slightest bit of martial chi in her body. Recently, White Academy's courses are all related to martial chi. She probably couldn't stay any longer and asked for leave. The steward reported word for word the news he received from the courtyard. Su Yenemo smiled, her face showing her natural arrogance. All right, you can leave. We will go to Profound Heavens first thing in the morning tomorrow. After so many years of flattery, she knew that little bastard better than anyone else. She felt inferior, yet she wanted to stand out. Now she finally knew what she was worth. After this martial chi test, that little bastard would understand that she and her beloved daughter were not on the same level at all. She was originally a good-for-nothing, and when her name was removed from the family, she left so vigorously. At that time she would still have to come back like a beggar without a single redeeming feature and beg for a living. Su Yenemo thought of the future scene and the smile on the corner of her mouth became wider. One should not be so naive. She was so muddle-headed that she had even forgotten who she was, yet she still dared to provoke her. Sooner or later that little bastard would kneel on the ground and lick her feet. She was not in a hurry. This was just the beginning. At night, the crescent moon hung in the sky. In the extremely luxurious palace, there were layers of white gauze curtains. A huge and incomparably luxurious golden cage was placed in the middle of the bedroom. Beside the cage was a pool of clear water. Inside the cage was a large carved bed made of pure wood. There was something like a bracelet hanging on the bed. That thing was made of pure gold with intricate patterns on it. It looked exquisite and enchanting, just enough to buckle one's wrist. The side of the bracelet that was close to the skin was inlaid with a layer of rabbit fur, soft and comfortable and would not hurt when worn. Further inside there was a dazzling golden piece. A person was lying on the soft bed, his white brocade robe swaying gently in the wind. His picturesque side face was covered with a layer of brilliance. He held an ancient scroll in one hand and supported his head lazily, as if he was very satisfied with this newly made golden cage. The corner of his mouth had a faint smile. His charm was not diminished by the luxurious golden light in the room. On the contrary, he was elegant and charming, taking the full advantage of the romantic Nangong Lai, who was sitting opposite him, shuddered when he saw his smile. "Aju, are you really going to sleep here in the future?" "Yes." Baligaju responded unhurriedly. Nangong Lai swallowed a mouthful of tea. "Don't you think this thing is too eye-catching? Making a pure gold cage as a bed, only he could think of it." Baligaju slowly turned a page of the ancient scroll in his hand. "I don't think so." Nangong Lai was speechless. "The point is, what do you want to do with this thing? Don't tell me you really want to lock Hellion Vivian up?" Nangong Lai used to think that he was just joking. Baligaju glanced at him. "What does this have to do with you?" "I'm just curious. Nangong Lai was mentally and physically exhausted. "Most people don't want to be locked up. Aju, you have to understand, no matter how interesting she is in your eyes, it's the same. When she sees this kind of thing, she will definitely run away." The word escape made the light in Bailey Jiaju's eyes turn cold. He slightly stood up, one elbow propped on the chair under his body, the other arm casually rested on his bent knee. It was obviously a languid posture, but when he did it, it interpreted extreme danger. She won't have that chance. Listening to the movements in the room, the eunuch outside the door had already poked his head in to look many times. He probably wanted to ask when Baligaju was going to take a bath, but he didn't dare to come in. Finally, Baligaju put the scroll beside the pillow and stood up. The servant at the side immediately stepped forward to help him put on his boots. He was dressed in a moon-white rose robe with a large fur coat made of fiery red fox skin draped over it. Just as he was about to change into the White Academy's uniform, he saw a dark shadow pass by and respectfully kneel on the ground. "Your Highness, we have lost track of the person." Baligaju's slender fingers paused and looked towards the shadow. His dark eyes became more and more cold like ice. "Lost her? Miss Hellion seemed to be preparing to meet someone and only discovered us halfway. After that, she threw off all of our shadows." Shadow hung his head down heavily. Baligaju didn't speak. His white hand threw away the robe. The light outside the window hit his bare waist and spread a thin layer of red. It made him look like a precious ivory sculpture that should be stored in the innermost part of a museum. It was very low-key and luxurious. Nangong Lai analyzed. She must have gone to meet someone important. Otherwise she wouldn't have thrown them off. Could it be that she went to see Heizei? "Aju, did you notice that when we were competing she and Heizei were acting strangely?" Crack. Not waiting for Nangong Lai to finish speaking. The teacup he was holding seemed to be shattered by some invisible force. Nangong Lai opened his mouth and stared blankly. His face was a mess. The tea slid down the side of his face and dripped onto the table. He subconsciously looked toward Bailey Jiaju, only to see that man who had always been expressionless punch the wall with the side of his fist. His knuckles overflowed with blood, but he was completely unaware of it. There was still a smile on the corner of his mouth. The wall was full of cracks with uneven lines. A cool breeze swept past, rolling up his ink-black hair like silk. The surrounding space was so cold that it was somewhat inconceivable. Nangong Lai looked at this scene and slightly narrowed his eyes. So intense, not like his style at all. Chapter 214. The night grew darker. Hellion Vivian, who everyone thought was hiding because she was afraid of losing face, had already finished the last armament. She reached out and pressed her neck, turning left and right handsomely. Then looking at the 5 dazzling armaments on the table, she lazily smiled. "Where's Heizei? He's not here yet?" "Young master was locked up by master. I'm afraid he won't be able to come out for the next few days." Manager Zhang marveled at the exquisiteness of those armaments. His eyes were filled with emotion. Holding a magnifying glass in his hand, he looked at them from beginning to end. Hellion Vivian smiled and sat down on the wooden chair. Immediately, someone handed her tea. Hellion Vivian thanked the servant, then asked, "Hasn't he been quite well behaved recently? Why does Master Hay still dislike him?" "It seems that because he did something, the royal family sent people to investigate." Manager Zhang didn't take this matter to heart. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She didn't know that a certain highness would find trouble with He Zhe. In the future she would find time to properly talk to a certain highness. He was an ally, so he couldn't casually use a knife. "There's still 4 more hours until daybreak. You all should go to sleep." Hellion Vivian put down the teacup in her hand. As if she thought of something, she said, "Oh right, leave 3 spots for me." Manager Zhang frowned. 3 spots? Miss still doesn't want to announce your boss's identity. "It's not time yet." Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. "However, it's still okay to properly enjoy the privilege. When the time comes, I'll bring my friend over." Manager Zhang's face lit up. "Miss Friend? Which family's young master, or is it Miss?" "It's not some young master, right?" Hellion Wei Wei lazily yawned. "I'm not sure about that person's family background, but his appearance is very attractive. If in the future he's the spokesperson for our martial arts academy, money will definitely drop like a crashing crash." Manager Zhang felt that he didn't understand the big boss's words. "Endorsement? Just take our armaments and go out to fight." Hellion Vivian recalled the scene of her desk mate instantly killing the Yuan family's young master in White Academy, and the smile on the corner of her mouth became even wider. He's the kind of person who can control any kind of martial cultivator. When Manager Zhang heard this, his face was filled with astonishment. What kind of martial cultivator can control it? Did such a person still exist in the War Dragon Empire? Logically speaking, martial cultivators and martial artists' martial chi complemented each other. How could there be someone who could control any martial cultivator? Manager Zhang scratched his head. Hellion Vivian was already asleep. Her body was leaning against a wooden chair in a lazy posture. Her long hair fluttered on the golden-colored carpet. Coupled with the fact that she was wearing men's clothing, she really looked like an exquisite and beautiful young man who had walked out of a manga. How could he fall asleep like this? Steward Zhang shook his head, glanced at the servant beside him and made a shushing gesture. The miss was undoubtedly the most tired today. From the design of the cards to the assembly of the martial cultivators, it was all done by her alone. She didn't even eat a few bites of dinner. She was always busy and busy. Now that she finally had some free time, Manager Zhang didn't disturb her anymore. He retreated with the servant and gave a few instructions to the people below. Manager Zhang looked at the brightly lit auction house. Everywhere was filled with luxury. Every seat here needed to be reserved. The seats at the back cost 10,000 taels, not to mention what kind of status the people sitting in the front row had. This kind of model was unprecedented. In other words, their boss had created another miracle. Only, who would have thought that this miracle was created by the young girl who everyone thought was a good-for-nothing until now? The next day, the capital was in an uproar. Originally, the martial chi competition was about to begin. These 8 big alleys were already filled with people coming and going. Now, because of the martial cultivator auction, it attracted countless martial artists. Some people said that this auction was not the slightest bit inferior to young Master Wu Shuang's auction of martial cultivators. Therefore, in this group of people not only were there high officials and nobles who wanted to broaden their horizons, there were also various masters in the martial cultivator world. Of course, there were also masters who didn't like the younger generation of Profound Heavens. After all, they were all at that age and had prestige in the capital. This little brat came, wasn't he provoking them? No matter from which perspective, Profound Heavens was creating a first-class spectacle. For the sake of participating in this auction, Hellion Jiao Air specially wore a light purple long skirt. The cuffs were embroidered with the same color decorative designs. Silver threads hooked out several pieces of auspicious clouds with tassels. Her hair was wrapped in a pure white gauze, contrasting with her even more elegant and beautiful appearance. As soon as she got off the carriage, quite a few people turned to look in her direction. It was a pity that beauties always liked to be half-covered so that they would be more charming. Unfortunately, they wanted to make people unable to see their appearance clearly. Her hand gently held Madame Sue's arm, and she stood at the side like a small and delicate person, watching Madame Su greet the high officials and nobles who passed by. Those people also wanted to curry favor with Madame Su, so they didn't mention the part where she was locked up in the temple. Instead they chatted about all kinds of things, wanting to sit closer to Madame Su. Therefore there was no lack of people who wanted to curry favor with her. She pulled Madame Su's hand and said, "Sister, you're finally here. I heard some time ago that your family has a good relationship with the boss of Profound Heavens. I'm relying on sister to arrange a good seat." "It's just through letters," Madame Su said modestly, but her heart was full of pride. She smiled gently and said, "Sister, you also know that I'm not in the capital these days. I can help you arrange a good seat." That person laughed. "What did I say? Sister Mo is the one with the ability. Okay, let's go in early. The sun outside is scary. My girl's skin has been delicate since she was young. She can't stand the sun." Madame Su finished speaking and shook her head, but with a subtle sense of superiority. Hearing this, everyone looked at the Hellion Jiaoer. "This is Jiaoer, right? She's really a beauty that can cause the downfall of a city. She's a beauty that can captivate birds and beasts. How can you say that people can't be compared? My girl stays in the house all day long and she's cultivating in the academy. After cultivating for so long, she still doesn't have a bit of martial qi. Look at Jiaoer, not only is she beautiful, she's also a genius. I think that this time she'll surprise everyone again. I heard that there are martial artists from Cloudfall Nation who came specifically for Jiaoer, wanting to compete with her. Even people from Cloudfall Nation know about Jiaoer's fame? That's really not simple." "That's right, I heard that it was Master Wu Shuang who brought them. One is a prince from a neighboring country, and the other is a princess from a neighboring country. They both want to see Jiaoer's face." Chapter 215. I think that whatever princess is jealous. Someone laughed and intimately pinched the Hellion Jiaoer's face. "Look at you, how did you give birth to such a beautiful face? You're going to outshine all the women in the world." "Auntie Chen, you're making fun of Jiaoer again." The Hellion Jiaoer shyly lowered her eyes, but the corners of her mouth revealed a complacent smile. The maid standing next to the Hellion Jiaoer also spoke without restraint. "Young miss, you're too kind and too modest. You're obviously the most beautiful." Unexpectedly, as soon as her voice fell, a person walked over from not far away. That person seemed to have just woken up. Her jade-like green left hand held a bamboo umbrella, and under the umbrella was a person wearing a red feathered gown. She walked very lazily and her long calves were casually exposed. Her long silk-like hair hung unbound on both sides, dark and curly. She had a snow-white oval face without much makeup. Her lips were light and very beautiful, but there was a bright red mole at the corner of her mouth. The knurled gown complemented her snow-white skin. Her eyes were bright and slender and the corners of her eyes were raised. Her curly hair fell to the side of her ears, and the corner of her mouth had a charming smile. The red gown made this laziness even more stunning. Although the gown was for men because the person wearing it was too lazy to the bone, and the immortal aura was otherworldly, people could tell at a glance that it was a woman. At that moment almost everyone sucked in a breath of air. Their eyes didn't turn as they stared at the fairy that appeared out of thin air. Their faces were filled with unprecedented surprise. That person seemed to not notice the gazes around her as she held the umbrella and casually looked at them. The Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands. She was naturally unhappy that such an uninvited guest stole everyone's attention. When she saw the face clearly, she was even more so. "Isn't this that village girl?" the maid blurted out, causing Madame Su to look over. "What village girl?" Madame Su looked at the figure in the distance and felt that it was strangely familiar. But when did such a young girl of the same age as her beloved daughter appear in the capital? Why didn't she know at all? Seeing that her miss didn't say anything, the maidservant said, "It's the fairy that was talked about in the capital some time ago." Madame Su was in the general's residence at that time, so she was naturally affected by this rumor. She had never taken this matter to heart before. After all, she had meticulously raised Jiaoer since she was a child. Whether it was the hair cream or the rouge, they were all made of ready-made pearls. She wanted her to grow up into a beauty that no one could compare to. How many times had she entered the palace? How many daughters had she seen? None of them were as outstanding as her Jiaoer. Naturally, she would not believe the rumors that were circulating in the alleyways. But now it seemed that there really was something in the capital that she didn't know. Madame Su wrinkled her eyebrows. She didn't like this feeling of being out of her control. But even so, she knew what to say in this matter so that her beloved daughter wouldn't be compared. Nowadays, these girls don't know the rules. With that kind of dress, where did they come from? It's a debate. In the future, when you see this kind of person, take the miss and stay away, do you understand? Although Madame Sue's mouth was scolding the servant girl, in fact, she wanted to express that the woman's origin was unknown. She didn't know where this seductive woman came from, but she couldn't even be compared to her family's Jiao heir. When the crowd heard this, they followed one after another. Just don't know which ignorant person's soul has been seduced. It's still Jiao heir who looks. That person originally wanted to say good-looking, but felt that this statement was too hypocritical. Abruptly, she changed it to pure. Hellion Jiao heir's face was still smiling, but her heart had long since lost the good mood from before. She waited until there was no one else around before she pulled the servant girl over. She used some strength in her fingers and said, "You go and find out for me who that person is. How did he appear here? She's also wearing a robe that looks good." "Yes." The maidservant trembled as she responded. Not for anything else, but because of Hellion Jiao's twisted little face. No one had seen the true appearance of the most talented woman in the capital. Only she knew that no matter how cute a person was, when her expression was sinister, it was really frightening. This servant will go and follow her. Wait a moment. Hellion Jiao called her back. Go and ask her what she does. If she's just a lowly wench in the red light district, then give her a sum of money and let her stay far away from the capital. Hellion Jiao had been surrounded by stars for a long time. She simply couldn't tolerate anyone who was prettier than her. Previously, when they met for the first time, Hellion Jiao didn't feel much threat because at that time, her dressing was so unsophisticated that it could drop dregs. She only relied on her good looks, skin and figure. Right now, Hellion Jiao clearly and distinctly felt that in front of that person she had fallen by a large step. No, she must make her disappear. Or, before she leaves, make her tell you the secret to whitening her skin. Hellion Jiao's eyes were filled with poison. Ask her what she eats on a daily basis. The maidservant cautiously asked, what if she doesn't say? Then tell her who paid for it. Hellion Jiao raised her chin and laughed coldly. It's very easy for the general's residence to make someone die quietly. The maidservant felt a chill run down her back and hurriedly responded, yes. Then she hurriedly chased in the direction Hellion Vivian had just left. It had to be said that Hellion Jiao was ruined by her own arrogance. If she hadn't looked down on Hellion Vivian before, she wouldn't have failed to recognize the umbrella in Hellion Vivian's hand. Because that wasn't an umbrella at all. Rather, it was the armament that Wei Wei won at Armament City at that time. However, in order to make it more practical, Hellion Vivian had made a few small adjustments later on, so that it had a function that no other armament had. Invisibility. As long as it reached the right temperature and wind direction. This umbrella could automatically create a false airflow, hiding Hellion Vivian who was holding it. However, its external appearance hadn't changed much. That was why Hellion Jiao had been too careless, because in her heart Hellion Vivian would always be the ugliest of the ugliest. Hellion Vivian had originally wanted to change her clothes first, then paint her face and go to the academy to find those two guys. He wanted to invite them out to watch the armament auction. In the end, just as she turned a corner, she discovered that there was still a small tail that she hadn't shaken off. Only this small tail was clearly inferior to the previous person, and didn't even know how to hide his presence. Hellion Vivian turned sideways and her ankle suddenly turned. Chapter 216. The surrounding wind seemed to have a sense of reality as it blew her hair. Her robes fluttered in the wind. Her beauty was peerless. The servant girl didn't expect her to suddenly turn around. She was startled at first, but then she straightened her back. She was clearly young, but she had learned her master's arrogance by 70 to 80%. Woman, isn't this the servant girl of that younger sister of yours who wants to frame you all day long? Why is she following you? Yuan Ming lazily smiled in the Xianhuan space. Hellion Vivian didn't speak. She held the umbrella in her hand and the cherry blossoms fell. It was a beautiful scene. This made the servant girl feel very uncomfortable, but she didn't forget her young miss's order. She took a step forward and said to Hellion Vivian, "Young miss, which brothel do you belong to?" "Which brothel?" Hellion Vivian repeated this sentence and a cold light flashed through her eyes. Unfortunately, the servant girl didn't realize it. Or it could be said that she was used to acting like a tyrant by Hellion Jiaoer's side. She didn't care about the flowers and plants outside, not to mention a prostitute who only had looks. If you don't want to say, I won't force you. The servant girl put on airs. I have a banknote worth 10,000 taels. My young miss said that as long as you tell us the secret of how to maintain your skin, this banknote will be yours. So someone came to buy you. Woman, I didn't expect you to be so popular. Yuan Ming smiled evilly at the side. Hellion Vivian glanced at the banknote. 10,000 taels? The servant girl thought that she had never seen so much money before. She continued to raise her chin. That's right. But what she didn't expect was that the other party actually laughed lightly. That laughter seemed to have a little bit of playfulness. 10,000 taels is such a small amount of money. Your young miss can take it out. It's enough to buy a servant girl like you. The servant girl was angry. She thought that such a wild woman dared to challenge her, a head servant who came from the general's residence. She immediately sneered. Do you know who I am? You really want to do this the hard way? Hellion Wei Wei casually glanced at her and allowed her to yell at her side, as if she simply didn't put her in her eyes. Compared to Hellion Vivian's faint smile, the maid's warning did not have any effect. Instead it became unnecessary noise. When the maidservant saw this, she didn't care about anything else and scolded, Do you really think you're so valuable? You just a whore. I'm talking to you. Can't you hear me? Hellion Vivian looked at her. Suddenly she tilted her head and smiled. Then there was a slap. A slap landed on his face. The maidservant was shocked and covered her face in disbelief. She was so angry that her face was distorted. She glared fiercely and screamed, You dare to hit me, you dare to hit me. You bitch. Pop. Hellion Vivian raised her hand again. Her smile was cold and charming. So what if I hit you? You. I'm going to kill you. The maidservant completely lost her mind. She bared her fangs and brandished her claws at Hellion Vivian. She looked like she wouldn't give up until she beat her to death. Hellion Wei Wei merely smiled. That gloomy and cold aura that she had been concealing started to emit without restraint. Her pair of bright and beautiful eyes were gradually dyed with frost. Suddenly her finger moved like a dancing butterfly, drawing a curved line that cut through the air. Chua. The sharp end was firmly pressed against the maidservant's neck. Her movements were so fast that the maidservant didn't have time to react. When she came back to her senses, there was a small cut on her neck. As long as I use a little bit of force, your artery will be cut open. Hellion Vivian held the umbrella in one hand and the silver knife against the maidservant's neck with the other. The wind blew and lifted her long hair. He smiled like a demon. When the time comes, it won't be as simple as your face hurting. Your blood will spurt out and get everywhere. Hey, do you want to try? You can say bitched again. I promise you will die a happy death. The maidservant no longer dared to clamor. Her legs had already begun to tremble and her face was almost blood red. Her entire body sank into extreme fear and all of a sudden she went limp on the ground. Hellion Wei Wei looked at her absent-mindedly. Her slender fingers slowly tore the banknote into shreds. Go back and tell your family's young miss. This lord was born beautiful. Even if she wanted to learn, she couldn't. As for the money, don't think that just because the Hellion Jiaoer is rich and powerful she can do whatever she wants. Teach your maidservants well so that they don't get slapped in the face every day. The flying shredded paper fell. The maidservant watched as the beautiful figure walked further and further away. When her fingers touched the blood on her neck, she was scared out of her wits. She didn't expect this woman to be so powerful. Just now she didn't even use martial qi, but she suppressed her to the point that she couldn't move at all. But as the Hellion Jiaoer's personal maidservant, she had martial qi and was about to cultivate to the fire level. But she couldn't even beat a person without martial qi. This woman, who is she? The maidservant's face was pale. She ran all the way through the long alley. Her fingers were covering her neck and she didn't dare to let go. Young Mississippi Hellion Jiaoer turned her head and saw that it was her personal maid who was in this state. Her clothes were even stained with blood. While no one was paying attention, she hurriedly pulled her to the side and frowned. What's going on? The maidservant reported what happened just now to Hellion Jiaoer without missing a word. Her face was ferocious. This servant has never seen such an ungrateful woman. Hellion Jiaoer didn't say anything. She was so angry that her lungs were about to explode. She endured and endured, but in the end she couldn't hold back anymore. She kicked the maidservant's heart hard. Useless thing. The maidservant was already injured. After being kicked like this, her whole body was lying on the ground. Her chi and blood were churning. The pain in her whole body was simply indescribable. However, no one would be able to see this scene. When Hellion Jiaoer turned around, she had already recovered her usual charming and innocent appearance. She walked into the crowd like a well-bred young lady with outstanding conduct. In her heart, there were no less than 100 thoughts of finding that slut and cutting her into pieces. Her eyes were filled with unconcealable jealousy. As a mother, naturally Madame Su had long since seen these things. She sent someone to first drag that servant girl away, then walked over and patted Hellion Jiaoer's hand, saying, "How many times have I told you nothing else is important? What's important is the results of this time's armament test. Why do you care about a country bumpkin? Just wait, in a moment when the auction starts, these people will know that only you are worthy of being the center of attention." Chapter 217. Jiaoer understands everything mother said, but that little bitch is so arrogant. Hellion Jiaoer clenched both of her hands. A malevolent expression appeared on her face. Isn't it just a good-looking face? Just wait and see when I'll scratch up that slut's face. Su Yenimo pulled her over, looked at her left and right, pinched her and said, "Jiaoer, how many times have I told you? You have to watch your words and actions. You are the most favored lady of the defense division, the apple of your father's eye, and the future master of the Eastern Palace. So many pairs of eyes are watching you, hoping to find the slightest mistake, even more so now. You have to remember, even if you are angry, don't show it in front of others, understand?" Hellion Jiaoer also knew that her face didn't look too good, but she was still angry in her heart, yet she didn't dare to disobey her mother's words. She shook Madame Su's arm and acted like a spoiled child as she stuck her face close to her. "Daughter understands." Madame Su stroked her beloved daughter's long hair, her eyes shining. "You don't have to be so calculative about that person's appearance. Isn't she just a village girl? Tomorrow find a few people to find out her name and ruin her. Not just scratch her face but ruin it. More ruthless than Hellion Jiaoer." "Mother is right, I won't make a fuss." Hellion Jiaoer curved her thin lips, the corners of her mouth forming a vicious smile. She knew her mother's methods better than anyone else. If her mother said to ruin that person, there was no possibility of that person rising again. However, this pair of mother and daughter had never thought that, just like what Hellion Vivian said, money and power were not enough to cover the sky. There were always many variables in this world, and Hellion Vivian's real identity was the cause of many variables. The sky was clear, there were no clouds in sight. The wind blew gently, the emerald green pine and cypress supported the water droplets, the branches swaying. When the branches could no longer bear the weight of the water droplets, only then did they slightly press down on the branches. Snap! Dew hit her face. At this time, Wei Wei had already changed her makeup and wore White Academy's uniform. She looked all around, yet didn't find the two people she was looking for. That was strange. Could it be that they were also on vacation? Hellion Vivian, who had returned without any success, didn't waste any more time on this. Seeing that no one was around, she simply walked out. Such an entry and exit made everyone's guess even more. Look, she actually came back. Coming back at this time, you must have forgotten something. It seems so. But some guys are really exaggerated. They call her boss the moment they see her. That's enough. It's just those people from the good compound who haven't seen the world and are blindly joining in the fun. Some people probably haven't tasted the feeling of being praised before, so they're doing this on purpose. It's as if they're showing off how powerful they are and how popular they are. Originally, when Wei Wei saw those little brothers that she'd accepted, she wanted to give out 2 of the seat tickets in her hand before stopping. Who knew that before they even started chatting, those young ladies from the big families who'd gathered together to practice martial chi saw her as an eyesore. They wholeheartedly thought that she was fighting for a position and looked down on her. After all, no matter how she thought about it, they were stronger than her. This woman's martial chi was indeed good, but what was the use of that? A bad family background was fatal. Furthermore, she didn't have the slightest bit of martial chi. Those people should be surrounding them. Why were they so blind as to surround a country bumpkin? Hellion Vivian understood that this was all caused by jealousy. She crossed her arms and looked at them with an evil smile. The person standing beside her was also a straightforward person. Chinny Feng, who was from the general's estate, spoke with a reckless spirit. Are you done? You're always chattering. Other than speaking ill of others, what else can you do? Just based on this point, you can't compare to boss. Yes. Your boss is an influential figure. One of them laughed mockingly. After all, there isn't anyone who can't even score a point in the martial chi class. Even the Hellion family couldn't help but kick her out of the family tree. Relying on her little martial chi attainments, she thinks that she's invincible. In the end, when the martial chi test came, she revealed her true colors. I don't understand. We're both from the general's estate, but Miss Jiao Air is very kind. Even when she went to Profound Heaven's auction, she didn't make a fuss. If your boss really has the ability, she should also go to the auction and stroll around. Sister, what are you saying? Aren't you making things difficult for our eldest miss? With all of her belongings, it's estimated that she can't buy a seat in the last row of the auction. You shouldn't make things difficult for a poor student. The ladies from the noble families talked back and forth, waving their fans at each other and mocking with fake smiles. You all shut up for me. The more Chinny Feng listened, the angrier he got. He also studied martial arts. After he lost to Hellion Vivian, he was convinced. People like them who studied martial arts, in addition to talent, also paid attention to dexterity. Not everyone could learn martial arts, not to mention how difficult it was to sell those materials. And their boss was the most awesome. Even if ordinary materials in her hands could be turned into a top-notch martial art. These people with eyes at the top of their heads simply didn't know what this meant for the martial arts world. They even ridiculed their boss for not having money. If their boss had money, the martial arts she made would definitely be sold like hotcakes. It can't be, young Master Chin, you want to fight with us for her? Someone sized up Chinny Feng with a glance. I say, young Master Chin, you shouldn't have some shameful thoughts about your boss, right? For example, you want to marry your boss or something like that. After the words fell, another burst of laughter. Among them, a lady from an aristocratic family laughed until tears came out. She pointed at Chinny Feng and Hellion Vivian and said, "You don't say, their skin color is actually quite similar. I just don't know if in the future when they give birth to a child, it won't be a little black coal ball, right?" Chin Yifeng exploded with a bang. He wanted to rush over and have a good fight. Hellion Vivian pressed down on his wrist. It seemed that she didn't use much strength, but it made Chin Yifeng turn his head in surprise. His eyes flashed with deep astonishment. He knew that although their boss's skill was good, she didn't have a foundation. It was said that when she had just entered the academy, she won that match. Because at that time Hellion May's performance wasn't very good. Of course, he didn't know what was going on in that match. After all, what the match was really like, only the competitors themselves knew. But at that time in the crystal ball test, their boss clearly didn't even have the ability to ignite the crystal ball. But why did she just lightly put her hand on his arm? He felt a strength he had never felt before. This didn't seem like the strength of a person without martial chi. Chapter 218. Chin Yifeng looked at Hellion Vivian in disbelief. Hellion Vivian just smiled, with 30% evil charm and 70% playfulness. Her eyes met the ridicule of those rich young masters and young ladies. It turns out that the Profound Heavens auction location is so popular. Of course. Those people glanced at her arrogantly. Don't tell me you don't know what Profound Heavens is? Come to think of it, a person like you, I'm sure you haven't even seen Profound Heavens before. Chin Yifeng's eyes were red. Our boss really wants to see Profound Heaven's armaments. Grandmaster Zizun's armaments are also top-notch. Haha, a country bumpkin is a country bumpkin, really can't communicate. That person held a handkerchief. I say, sisters, let's not waste time here. Let's see if we can buy a seat in the back row through Miss Jiao Air. There's no need to think about the front row, it must have already been booked. These words are true. I heard that the auction won't start until tonight. Let's go ask for leave now and let Miss Jiao Air take us in, how about it? I think it's okay. A group of people laughed and talked, walking together in the direction of the superior compound. Even some of the people who were surrounding Hellion Wei just now also awkwardly changed sides at the last minute. This kind of phenomenon actually often appeared in modern times, forming cliques to squeeze people out. It was probably because they looked down on Hellion Vivian from the bottom of their hearts. Like those people said, she didn't have power and influence, so she was doomed to be criticized no matter what she did. But those people probably never thought that they would regret this decision so much in the near future. Hellion Vivian glanced at the people around her. In addition to Chinny Feng, there were 2 girls and a boy. Among the 2 girls, one of them made Hellion Vivian raise her eyebrows. When she looked at her, there was a touch of light in her eyes. This is the childhood sweetheart that Zhe, that guy, didn't dare to confess to? Nalan Hongye saw Hellion Vivian looking at her. She raised her eyes and was very forthright. What's wrong? Are you interested in coming with me? Hellion Wei's words were interrogative, but she didn't give the other party the slightest chance to refuse. Her fingers grasped Nalan Hongye's wrist. He had to bring this along. She was the future young madam of the He family, so what if she took Zhang Wei's world's tickets? In a moment when they arrived at the shop, she would tell manager Zhang to put all the bills on He's H. The more Hellion Vivian thought about it, the more she felt that it was a good idea. The smile on her face grew wider. Yes. Nalan Hongye had never seen such a woman before. Her smile only made people feel comfortable. She didn't have the subtle gaze that others looked at her. She had always done things like a man, and there were many old men in her family, so she had been raised as a man since she was young. To be honest, she really couldn't understand women. Alright, even though she was also a woman. But for example, when they were eating together, their conversation would always revolve around Hellion Vivian. She didn't want to participate in this kind of conversation. These people gradually alienated her. Bastard, she just wanted to be a beautiful girl who ate quietly. Was it so difficult? Also, those letters written to Zhe, could they always be sent to her? Being sent letters like this by so many girls would affect her marriage in the future. What's more, every time she told Zhe about this kind of thing, Zhe would only give her a cold laugh. He even said that if she sent such letters to the He residents again, she should never see him again. Then when she didn't see him, he got angry and said that she had no conscience. He was already locked up, but she didn't know to send him food. Why did she always feel that Zhe was the same as those women? They were all like needles at the bottom of the sea, very difficult to find. One moment he was like this, the next moment he was like that. It really made her very puzzled. Hellion Vivian looked at Nalan Hongye's side face. She didn't think that this girl would leave with her so easily. She thought that the other party would more or less dislike her because of Zhe's actions. She didn't expect that. It was unexpectedly interesting. You're not going to ask me where I'm taking you? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Nalan Hongye's small face was handsome, expressionless. I'm familiar with Sijio City. I can attest to this point. Chinny Feng raised his hand at the side. The people she knows are all local tyrants. The armaments they make are also very powerful. It's just that I don't know why she was assigned to the good compound. Nalan Hongye turned her head to look at Chinny Feng and asked in bewilderment, how do you know me so well? Chinny Feng's face reddened. He lowered his head and didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian, however, understood. Especially when Nalan Hongye had a baby face that everyone loved. Her skin was so tender that it could drip water. She was also not spoiled. This kind of girl, if someone discovered her good points, they would be deeply in love with her. Only she couldn't help but say that Zhe's move was good. It should be adjusted. Otherwise, if his sweetheart ran away with someone else, let's see how he would continue acting. Zhe didn't let me go to the good compound. He said that seeing me would make him upset. Nalan Hongye's eyes turned. It's probably my temperament that made him lose face. Who told me to not know how to judge people? Hellion Wei paused, her beautiful phoenix-shaped eyes looked up. She discovered that this girl wasn't as clueless as she appeared on the surface. She understood everything so much so that she could see more clearly than anyone else. She just didn't want to participate. You can come to our inferior compound to play. I'm usually bored by myself. Hellion Wei walked forward while chuckling as she looked at the girl in her hand. Apart from attending classes seriously, there's no other entertainment. Chinny Feng. Nalan Hongye. Attending classes seriously, was it really appropriate for someone who slept all day to the point that even the teacher wanted to remove her name from the class? Right, boss, where are we going? Nalan Hongye didn't want to know, but they also wanted to know. After all, asking for leave was too extravagant for them. Hellion Vivian smiled faintly and said lightly, we're also going to Profound Heavens. Another 2 hours passed. After the sunset, the show began. The streets were bustling with people coming and going, and there was an endless stream of horses and carriages. There were people who made sugar figures, sold rouge and powder, and fortune-telling people. The capital was originally the most prosperous capital of the Dragon War Empire. It was densely populated and luxurious. Now the streets of Chang'an were even more crowded. Probably the most luxurious carriages in the capital were gathered in front of profound heavens, waiting to enter. Inside there were also quite a few people wearing White Academy's uniform. From a distance, no matter how one looked at it, there were at least 6 or 7 people. There were both men and women surrounding Hellion Jiao Air's side, chatting and laughing, hoping that Hellion Jiao Air would lead them inside. Hellion Jiao couldn't not see their thoughts, but spending some money was nothing to her. What's more, these people's fathers were also useful in the imperial court. So Hellion Jiao didn't refuse at all. She was generous, as if profound heavens was her family's. Chapter 220. However, sometimes, it was not good for a woman to be too capable. No matter how powerful the Hellion family was, in the end, she was still unable to protect herself in her old age. Her husband was snatched away and the family property was taken away. Now the one who called the shots was not the one from the Hellion family, but Su Yenemo. Compared to that one, they preferred Su Yenemo. She was a stubborn person and always looked like a flower on a high mountain. She thought that she was great because she had fought a few battles, but when she returned to the capital, her reputation was still ruined by them. If they were to say she was a stupid girl. Now looking at her daughter's way of doing things, it was not much better. If she did not have any talents, she should just stay at home and not come out. She did not even see what kind of occasion it was today, and she still rushed to the front. The point was, did she think she could do it? Some of the ladies looked at Hellion Vivian arrogantly, as if they were looking at a clown. They thought that since they had not entered the scene yet, they might as well have some fun. I say, Weiwei, your name is Weiwei, right? How's your marriage going? Do you need us to introduce someone to you so that your mother won't have to worry about you? Before Hellion Vivian could say anything, Su Yenemo interrupted. It would be great if there is a suitable one. If this child does not have a husband for the rest of her life, I don't know how much my sister will hate me in the afterlife. Little sister Su, you're just too kind. Don't worry, I happen to have a pretty good one here. He just came back from the battlefield, but his legs are a little inconvenient. But Weiwei, you should also understand that at your age plus the previous incident, it's already good enough that someone can marry you back home. After saying that, that person sighed. Of course, it would also depend on whether the other side is willing to accept you. After all, you have no talents and no looks, it would be hard for me to explain to them. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She was smiling from beginning to end, but that smile did not reach her eyes. That's too scary. Someone actually dares to introduce men to you. Yuan Ming rubbed his arms. Aren't they afraid that you'll beat the other party until half of their body is paralyzed? Moreover, with a missing leg, they probably won't even be able to do that. Woman, it seems that some people think that you're worthless and want to deal with you cheaply. Qin Yifeng's family had a general before, so he had heard a little about this person who had just returned from the battlefield. When he heard the madam's words, he frowned. Isn't that person already in his 50s? You want our boss to marry an old man in his 50s? What a rotten old man. That's a general with outstanding military service. The madam didn't like Qin Yifeng either. She glanced at Hellion Vivian and said, Weiwei, it's not that I want to criticize you, but you're an unmarried girl. How can you hang around with men all day long? How can you be so rude to me? I'm your elder. Hellion Vivian laughed. She picked her ears with her fingers and said, I was wondering why the sound was so harsh to my ears. It turns out that it's because people have been barking nonstop. Also, Auntie, who are you? Am I close to you? You came up and said that you want to introduce a husband to me. Do you think you're so important? The madam was so angry that she kept hitting her own chest with her handkerchief. I've never seen such an ungrateful girl. Madame Su pretended to be red in the face. Sister, calm down. It's Weiwei who doesn't know the rules and doesn't understand our good intentions. All these years I've been scratching my head. Think about it, sister. You should know that it's not that I, Su Yenemo, don't not care. It's just that I can't control her. As she said this, she let out a long sigh and looked like she was about to cry from being wronged. When the people around them heard these words, they started to point at Hellion Weiwei one after another. When Madame Su saw this, she felt relieved. Thinking about the humiliation she had suffered in the hidden spirit temple this time, she had never suffered before. Now she could finally vent her disgust. What she wanted to see was to let this little bastard be condemned by everyone. Other than revenge, of course, Madame Sue had other plans. The auction was about to start. She received news that the retired emperor would be coming. Last time she heard from Jiao Heir that this little bastard used them to curry favor with the retired emperor. That was why the retired emperor was so angry. Calculating the time, the retired emperor should be arriving by now. He was most likely sitting in the tea house opposite. The environment there was good and the view was good. If it wasn't for the high officials and nobles of the capital, it was impossible to book a seat there on this day. Su Yenmo's guess was right. There was indeed someone sitting in the tea house. The retired emperor, dressed in a Chinese brocade robe, sat in the most important seat. He held a purple jade teacup in his hand. Between his eyebrows, there were traces of power left behind by years of mingling in a high position. Although his eyebrows were smiling, it gave people a sense of oppression without being angry. On his left and right sat 4 men, all of them were handsome and had extraordinary manners. Of course, the most outstanding one was the 3rd prince, dressed in a white robe and purple muslin, Baligaju. His elbows casually rested on the carved wooden chair, and his slender white fingers lazily propped up the side of his face. His finely crafted white robe fluttered in the wind, and his ink-black hair fluttered, revealing his handsome face that was both good and evil. The light of the setting sun faintly shone on his body through the wooden window, outlining his perfect figure in varying shades of light. Sitting opposite him was the heir of the Murong Palace, Murong Chongfeng. Compared to Bailey Jiaju's coldness and indifference, his eyes were filled with appropriate gentleness, not too much, not too little, and not too much. He wore a brocade cloak with a navy blue cloud-embroidered robe. His eyes watched the scene below and he sneered. Now that woman should know how difficult it was for her to marry someone other than him. Although he didn't like to see anyone treat her like this, it was more important than anything that there was someone who could let her see this clearly. Eunuch Sun, who was standing beside him, was not as magnanimous as Murong Chongfeng. Ever since he heard the words below, he wanted to go out and stop it, but the retired emperor had an attitude of wanting to listen. Therefore, no matter how anxious Eunuch Sun was, he could only stand to the side and look at his master's faint smile. He thought of His Highness's face, but he was still wearing a mask. If he took off the mask, who knew how cold it would be? In this way, someone was going to be unlucky. Regardless of what Hellion Vivian meant to His Highness. But in front of His Highness, she was so brazenly introducing her husband to His Highness's favorite princess. Chapter 221. If Miss Sue really agreed, wouldn't His Highness? Eunuch Sun glanced sideways and sized up Bailey Jiaju's expression. The people outside were still yelling, "I only proposed this marriage because I pity you. If General Wu didn't like your figure, who would want you based on your looks and style? You still have the cheek to come to the auction. Why don't you take out a mirror and look at your poor appearance, you uncontented little..." She didn't get to say the word bastard. Then she heard a bang. He was sent flying several meters away by a vicious kick. The madam only felt that her internal organs were in pain and there was a fishy taste in her mouth. She struggled on the ground trying to get up. Hellion Wei Wei stood at the side, lifted her long leg and stepped on the back of her hand. Her eyes were filled with a cold light. She easily lifted the madam's other arm and pinched her throat. The corners of her mouth carried a smile like a devil's. "That's why I said it would have been fine if you had just stayed put. You just had to make me do it." One must know that the madam who came here was from a wealthy family. Hellion Vivian's kick was almost a challenge to the authority of the entire aristocratic circle. In an instant, everyone was like a grasshopper in a pot. One by one they surrounded Hellion Vivian. Qin Yifeng looked at Hellion Vivian worriedly. He blocked left and right, trying to use his status to stop the soldiers from acting rashly. However, the people of Profound Heaven certainly wouldn't allow anyone to make trouble in their own territory. The shopkeepers outside also rushed over. The shopkeeper obviously knew Madame Sue. Seeing her give him a look, he angrily waved his hand and said, "What's the matter? Is Profound Heaven a place for people like you? You troublemaker. Get out of here now. You don't even have a reservation ticket and you dare to come here and make trouble." Whoosh. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes coldly. Her fingers spread slightly and a glittering golden card appeared in her palm. There were only 2 words engraved on the front of the card: Profound Heaven. When the shopkeeper saw the golden card, his legs went soft and he almost knelt on the ground. Gold card. Profound Heavens only gave out 2 gold cards. Not because of anything else but because Profound Heavens had 2 bosses. The gold card has been a symbol of their identity since they opened the shop. However, other than a few senior managers, no one had actually seen this golden card. How could it be in Hellion Vivian's hands? The shopkeeper's face turned pale and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. This is... Say it again. Who are you telling to get lost? Hellion Vivian stared coldly at the middle-aged man who was shorter than her. The shopkeeper shuddered violently. Hellion Jiaoer couldn't stand it anymore. Sister, how can you talk to the shopkeeper like that? Miss Jiaoer, it's okay. It doesn't matter what you say. The shopkeeper hurriedly waved his hand, sweating profusely as he stood there, repeating one sentence. The Hellion Jiaoer frowned. Shopkeeper, my eldest sister doesn't know how to be polite. You can just take her away. Mother won't do anything. After all, she was the one at fault first. That was their boss. The shopkeeper's thoughts had been in a mess since the beginning. After hearing Hellion Jiaoer's suggestion, his face turned even uglier. He looked at Hellion Vivian, wishing he could find a hole to hide in. The situation was getting worse. Housekeeper Zhang, who was busy setting up in the building, heard the report and hurried over. He was stunned when he saw the figure that was surrounded. You're finally here, Housekeeper Zhang. Su Yanemo didn't look at Housekeeper Zhang's expression. She felt that it was about time for her to speak. She was only thinking about her own goal and smeared Hellion Vivian's reputation. I can't control such a spoiled brat. She didn't even say a few words and she hit someone. She has no respect for the law. Housekeeper Zhang glanced at Hellion Vivian, who was smiling faintly, then turned to Madame Su and said politely, "It's better to ask what's going on." Housekeeper Zhang. Su Yanemo stood up straight and said with a hint of arrogance, "You don't have to give me face and let this brat go. She's no longer a member of the Defense Division. You can do whatever you want with her. The Defense Division can't afford to have such a vile creature." This has nothing to do with Madame Su. Housekeeper Zhang stood there politely with his hands folded in front of him. It was the standard standing posture of an old housekeeper. Those who knew him well would notice that there was respect in his politeness that had never been there before. Su Yanemo enjoyed it very much. She thought that Housekeeper Zhang's respect was directed at her. She raised her chin even higher and said, "Housekeeper Zhang, I know that you think that this brat is my stepdaughter, so you can't do anything to her. There's no need at all. From today onwards, not only is she no longer related to the Hellion family, she can forget about entering the defense division." The old housekeeper didn't say anything and frowned. He didn't know how to tell Madame Su that he wasn't being courteous to her at all. In fact, the defense division had already been blacklisted by Weizhe World since the last time. He really couldn't understand where Madame Su's self-confidence came from. "Mother, ask Housekeeper Zhang to quickly get someone to take eldest sister away, so that she won't do anything that will damage the family's reputation." Hellion Jiaoer was even more arrogant and directly ordered Housekeeper Zhang around as if he was her servant. Upon hearing this, Hellion Vivian sneered and kicked the person under her foot away with her long leg. She retracted her hand and slowly adjusted her collar. That indifferent attitude made her seem even more ruthless. "Old Zhang, I didn't know that other than my words, you would listen to other people's orders." Her voice was neither loud nor soft. It echoed in the noisy street, but it was unusually cool and cold. Su Yanmo's fingers stiffened and a bad premonition suddenly surged in her heart. What did she mean by that? Everyone turned back to look. They saw Housekeeper Zhang, who had always been calm and unapproachable, put his left hand on his right shoulder and said in a serious and respectful manner, "Boss, this old servant takes your salary. Other than your orders, no one else will and can't order this old servant around." Boss. Who was he calling? Very good. Hellion Wei's lips curved into a smile as she paused between each word. "I thought that my shop had been changed owners." Housekeeper Zhang looked at Su Yanemo and pointed out, "No, it's just that some people have overstepped their boundaries." Su Yanmo's whole body trembled. Her eyes slowly widened. When she looked at Hellion Wei again, it was as if her face had been slapped by someone. She could even hear the crisp sound of the slap. She felt extremely embarrassed in her heart. Even that originally arrogant smile also froze at the corner of her mouth. Not only her but even Helian Jiaoer and the students who wanted to curry favor with Helian Jiaoer to enter the auction, as well as many madams from famous families, were all stunned. Chapter 222. Well, there was an unprecedented uproar on the street. The extremely mysterious boss of Profound Heavens, who even the imperial family had never seen before, was Helian Vivian? How was this possible? Even Eunuch's son, who was standing on the second floor, exclaimed and turned to look at His Highness. Bailey Jiaju supported the side of his face with one hand and played with the teacup in the palm of his hand with the other. The small teacup turned back and forth between his fingertips. Just as it was about to fall, it fell between his other fingers. At this time he was looking at Helian Vivian. His long and narrow eyes flashed with a stronger appreciation than before. But in the next moment, that appreciation turned into an iceberg when he remembered the name of this martial arts company. Profound Heavens. Just by hearing these 4 words he knew what it meant. She really hid it from him. Did she like it that much? So much that she couldn't wait to use their names to become famous? Beligaju's face turned cold. His fingers clasped the teacup so hard that he didn't even realize it himself. The retired emperor was shocked because the reason why the imperial family's fighting strength had become stronger recently was because of Profound Heavens armaments. Only Profound Heavens could supply such a large amount of armaments, and the price was also the cheapest. This was very important for the development of a battle team. So even the retired emperor had always wanted to find an opportunity to meet this legendary martial arts master. He didn't expect that it would be this girl. Downstairs, Qin Yifeng was even more stupefied. He stared blankly at Helian Vivian. Boss, are you really the boss of Profound Heavens? Yes, I am. Helian Vivian smiled lightly. Qin Yifeng still felt like he was dreaming. But aren't you usually in the academy? How do you have time to do this during class? During class I'm always doing martial arts. Helian Vivian's voice faintly interrupted him. Qin Yifeng stared blankly for a moment. Then he laughed out loud and said in a clear voice, "So it turns out that you were practicing martial arts, not sleeping. Boss, you deceived everyone." Mainly sleeping and occasionally doing martial arts. Qin Yifeng was speechless. Helian Vivian patted him on the shoulder and then looked into Steward Zhang's eyes. She glanced at the shopkeeper who was still sweating and said, "Dismiss them and tell them that Profound Heavens is just Profound Heavens. It has nothing to do with any family. If anyone has anything to do with it, they should get lost." The last 3 words made the shopkeeper fall to the ground in an instant. Helian Jiaoer opened her mouth wanting to say something. Helian Vivian then turned her head, her eyes sweeping over them inch by inch, her long sleeves fluttering in the wind. "Old Zhang, according to the rules of Profound Heavens, those without a silver card, no matter who they are not allowed to enter the auction. Pass down the order. These people in the future in Profound Heavens, no matter how much money they take out, they will not be able to get a single armament." Boom. Those who originally thought that they would definitely be able to enter were completely dumbfounded, especially those students from the White Academy. They were so regretful that even their intestines turned green. Their fingers lightly clenched and their faces were ashen. Seeing this scene, Qin Yifeng was very excited. He knew that he was right to recognize this boss. Every time, just when people thought that Helian Vivian was only SOSO and could be trampled on by others, in the next moment, she would use an unexpected way to slap those people in the face. Her arrogant posture, handsome and shocking. "Helian Vivian, don't you think that you are too self-righteous? You just made a single armament and you dare to say such harsh words to us." The students were all spoiled since childhood. Where would they be able to endure such anger? They arrogantly shouted, "Believe it or not, my father can shut down Profound Heavens with just a word." Helian Vivian glanced sideways with a bloodthirsty smile. She did not look at them but asked Steward Zhang, "Who is his father?" "Minister Li from the Ministry of Appointments." Steward Zhang took a look and immediately knew who it was. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. "Minister Li, who is in charge of purchasing armaments for the imperial court? How about it? Now you know how to be afraid." The student raised his chin. "Most of the armaments in Profound Heavens are bought by my father." Helian Vivian raised her eyes and her smile became wider. "Pass down the order, stop all the armaments supplied to the Li family. If the imperial court sends someone to ask, just say that we are not happy with this business and will not do it." "Yes." Steward Zhang lowered his eyes. The student's expression stiffened. Hellion Vivian, don't be too arrogant. Without the Lee family, I would like to see how you can open your armaments business. Hellion Vivian sneered. Noisy. Old Zhang, take him away and beat him. How dare you? As soon as the student raised his head, Hellion Vivian gave him a kick. She stepped on his back valiantly, moved her fingers and took the wooden chair next to her. She stepped on him with cold eyes. Why wouldn't I dare? Puff. After being kicked and stepped on like this, the student surnamedly spat out a mouthful of blood. His appearance was extremely bleak. The scalps of the crowd were numb and they took a step back in fear. Hellion Vivian just took out a handkerchief and gently wiped the blood stains on her fingertips. She was like a flower that bloomed in hell, enchanting and bloodthirsty. I, Hellion Vivian, don't have other hobbies, but I like to slap people's faces. Do you think that I won't do it just because you are the young master of the Lee family? Today I, Hellion Vivian, will say one thing. No matter what your identity is, no matter how much money you have, don't think that you can escape unscathed after scolding me. After saying this, Hellion Vivian glanced sideways. Who else scolded me just now? Old Zhang, beat them all until they admit defeat. Everyone stepped back in horror and watched as 2 or 3 people from Profound Heavens were pinned to the ground by the people from Profound Heavens and slapped twice on their faces. Such a bloody way of doing things had firmly intimidated many people. Hellion Jiaoer was angry and wanted to go over. Su Yenmo held her hand and gestured for her to look at the tea house next to them. Hellion Jiaoer only then noticed that among the group of people standing opposite, there was a chess piece that her father had buried in the palace. So, the retired emperor was here too? Hellion Jiaoer understood her mother's meaning and let Hellion Vivian do as she pleased until she finally lost her life. She did not believe that the retired emperor would have any good impression of such a despicable person. Later he would definitely send someone to punish this little bastard. This was also the reason why the student from the academy shouted with a swollen face, Hellion Wei, if you have the guts, why don't you step on me like this? When my father comes, you'll die a horrible death. Hellion Vivian sneered and pinched the student's chin with her fingers. You should ask your father first, how did he negotiate with Profound Heavens? Since you're here, I'll ask Manager Zhang to talk to you about stopping the cooperation. Misunderstanding, this is all a misunderstanding. Young Master Li grabbed Hellion Vivian's sleeve, as if he was afraid that Hellion Vivian would really not do business with him. A dignified first-rank official had to beg Hellion Vivian like this. Rather than saying that Madame Su did not want to believe it, it was better to say that she did not want to see this scene at all. In an instant, those students who wanted to use their status to pressure people paled, especially young Master Li. He did not even dare to believe that his father had always been doing well. When had he ever been so submissive in front of others? Unless it was the retired emperor, Hellion Vivian smiled. It is inevitable that there will be misunderstandings in the business world. It's just that young Master Li seems to look down on me, always thinking that I only have one business deal with the Li family. No, absolutely not. Lord Li swallowed his saliva and explained, this business deal is not the Li family's. It is a collaboration between Boss Wei and the retired emperor. We both value this business deal very much. Hellion Vivian glanced at him. In that case, let young Master Li express his sincerity. Lord Li reached out and pulled young Master Li to the side, his face full of anger. Hurry up and apologize to Boss Wei. Young Master Li was most afraid of his father. His face was pale with fright and there was no trace of the arrogance from before. Boss Wei, I was wrong. You were too quiet, I didn't hear you clearly. Hellion Vivian sat lazily on the wooden chair, raised her eyes slightly and pointed at the group of gossipy people. Tell them clearly, who is in charge of this business deal? Young Master Li faced the crowd and stammered, It's Profound Heaven. Very good, it seems that young Master Li is clear about his position. Hellion Vivian stood up and looked at Manager Zhang, who was beside her. The business deal with the Li family will continue. But there is one thing, if today's situation happens again, put the Li family on the reject list. Tell them that Profound Heaven is like this, accepting business based on mood. Yes. Manager Zhang lowered his eyes. Hellion Vivian's voice was faint. Well, since it's all settled, you can go back to work. My friends and I will go in first. The auction is about to start. Make sure to clear the place. Those who don't like Profound Heaven, get rid of them. Yes. Manager Zhang began to command the guards. Hellion Jiaoer and Madame Su couldn't believe that things would develop in this direction. Not only did Eunuch Sun not take away Hellion Vivian, that little bitch, but it was Lord Li who personally apologized to her. It was not like his usual self. At that moment, Madame Su even felt that the person who slapped himself in front of Hellion Vivian was not Lord Li, but her. Hellion Jiaoer was so angry that she clenched the white handkerchief in her hand. The fall in her heart was indescribable. Originally she was the one who was in the limelight today, and it was easy for her to enter profound heaven. Besides, she couldn't think of anyone else who could win those armaments. But now she was reduced to the point of being driven away. Chapter 224. Mother. Hellion Jiaoer was anxious. Not only were there madams from the capital here, but there were also students from the same academy as her. If she was really chased away like this, where would she put her face in the future? Mother, we can't go. I don't believe that with my current status, I can't even get into a small auction house. I won't go. Hearing this, Hellion Vivian sneered. Old Zhang, did you hear that? I heard. Manager Zhang's gaze was slightly cold as he looked at Hellion Jiaoer. He really admired this genius who was known as the capital's #1 beauty. When other people tried to chase her away, she still refused to leave. How thick was her skin? Hellion Vivian's eyes turned cold. Then why haven't you beaten me yet? Ping. The sound of the swift and fierce staff rang in the air. Everyone was suddenly shocked. Looking at the masked knights, they were shocked and frightened. That was a new mercenary group that recently rose up, had tailor-made martial arts that others didn't have. They came and went mysteriously, their whereabouts were a mystery, and their commission fee was frighteningly high. They didn't accept commissions easily. Could it be that even this mercenary group was Hellion Vivian's? Everyone's eyes shook and they wanted to retreat in fear. Hellion Jiaoer refused to accept this and wanted to raise her martial chi, but Madame Su held her hand. Jiaoer. Stop. Mother, are you going to let this go? Hellion Jiaoer sneered. What mysterious mercenary group? Even if there were 10 of them working under that trash, they wouldn't be able to beat me. Madame Su saw that she couldn't persuade her and her tone became angry. She pointed her finger at her head. How can you be as stupid as your third sister? Think about it, what will the world say about you if you fight? Just because someone didn't let you in, you shamelessly insisted on entering. Mother, Hellion Jiaoer's eyes reddened as teardrops followed and fell down. However, she was full of hatred. I really can't take this lying down. When Madame Su saw her beloved daughter like this, she felt her face burn even hotter and her heart hurt even more. However, she had to endure it and quickly dragged the Hellion Jiaoer forward. This was the first time that she had been chased out of the trading company in such a manner, and yet she had to endure it without any temper. This was all because of Hellion Vivian. That little bastard. Sooner or later she would personally skin her alive. Who allowed you to leave? A cold voice sounded beside his ear. Before Su Yenmo could react, she saw a flash before her eyes. Hellion Vivian was already standing in front of her. She effortlessly stood in front of them, her long hair swaying slightly. Su Yenmo did not have an ounce of martial chi in her body. It was precisely because she did not have martial chi that she had set her sights on the Hellion bloodline before marrying into the defense division. Why was it that her daughter did not know anything while that bitch's daughter was born a genius? She was not convinced, so she simply used that bitch's blood to refine pills and carefully raised her daughter. That was how Hellion Jiaoer achieved her current status. When Hellion Vivian stood in front of her, she actually felt that the bitch had come alive and was here to take her life. Su Yenmo could not help but shudder. Hellion Jiaoer shouted angrily, Hellion Vivian, don't you go too far. You came to my territory and caused trouble, but you didn't even apologize. Who is the one who is going too far? Hellion Vivian sneered. Hellion Jiaoer remembered her mother's instructions and endured. Big sister, I never wanted to fight with you to this extent. Is that so? Hellion Vivian curled her lips and said evilly, that's not what you said just now. Hellion Jiaoer bit her lip tightly. I didn't know better just now. What did you say? Louder. Hellion Vivian reached out and dug her ears. Hellion Jiaoer clenched her hands tightly and took a deep breath. I didn't know better just now. If you don't know any better, then let Madame Su teach you well. Don't always get used to snatching other people's things and think that everything in the world belongs to you. Hellion Wei Wei said a few words. Su Yenmo's smile froze on her face. Looking at the gazes directed at them from all around, Su Yenamo could not bear to stay any longer. She pulled Hellion Jiao Air into the sedan chair. Those relatives who wanted to enter the auction by relying on Su Yenamo saw that Su Yenamo had left and quickly looked at Hellion Vivian. I told you Wei Wei is capable. Yes, yes. Someone followed and looked at Hellion Vivian ingratiatingly. Wei Wei, your second aunt and I have never said anything about you. Hellion Vivian turned around with a smile. You didn't say anything about me just now. Then look, your second aunt and I are already here, the location of the auction. That person continued to smile. Hellion Vivian looked up and said slowly, but you seem to have forgotten that you joined forces to banish me from the clan. That person's face turned pale. Then this matter. We were not willing to do that. After all, it was the 4 elders who made the decision. The woman standing at the side tried her best to explain. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. You were not willing? If you were not willing, would you have mocked me when I was out of the clan? Oui. The 2 madams still wanted to say something. Hellion Vivian did not waste any more time and said coldly, make them leave. Yes. Steward Zhang reached out and stopped them. The 2 madams looked like they were struck by lightning. Their expressions were stiff as they were blocked outside the door. Their faces showed deep resentment and jealousy because they could not get what they wanted. Eunuch Sun followed beside Hellion Vivian and said politely with a smile, Miss, this old servant is here to pass a message to the retired emperor. It is not convenient for him to appear, so he sent this old servant. I hope you don't mind. Eunuch Sun, what are you saying? Hellion Vivian smiled and returned to her usual politeness. I know what Eunuch Sun wants to say. I will trouble Eunuch Sun to pass the message. As long as there is a lot of money, Profound Heavens will do well for the retired emperor's martial practice. The horsetail whisk in Eunuch Sun's hand sank. Then this old servant will take his leave. I wish Miss a perfect ending to this auction. Thank you for your auspicious words. Hellion Vivian smiled and ordered the servant beside her. Send Eunuch Sun out. Yes. After Eunuch Sun left, Chen Yifeng then said with a worried face, Boss, today's matter is satisfying, but you may not have a smooth journey in the future. Those people from the general's residence will definitely not let you go so easily. Today Eunuch Sun was here, so they didn't make a move. When you make the retired emperor's martial arts, they won't be so afraid. After all, you don't have a backer, and there are also the Li family and the Wu family. They are all from the 4 great families. If you offend them, I'm afraid it will be very difficult for you to walk in the capital in the future. I'm afraid something will happen. How about I stay by your side to protect you these few days? Chapter 225. No need. Hellion Wei Wei moved her wrist and casually smiled. I can handle it myself. Don't worry, the auction is about to start. You guys can go to the seats that I have reserved and sit down. I still have some things to take care of. Chen Yifeng still felt uneasy, but Steward Zhang had already politely led them to another place. In the tea house, Eunuch Sun reported Hellion Vivian's words to the retired emperor. The retired emperor sat back in his seat and looked at the trembling official Li. He was not in the mood to watch the auction anymore. He just waved his hand and left the rest to Beligaju. Then he returned to the palace with his guards. Official Li breathed a sigh of relief. He thought that since the retired emperor did not ask about it today, this matter would be over. However, he had forgotten that if it was His Highness who took action, there would only be 2 situations. The first was that His Highness was completely uninterested. In that case, he would have to congratulate Lord Li's ancestors for being able to live in peace. The second situation was that His Highness was very interested. In that case, he would still have to congratulate Lord Li, because there really weren't many things that His Highness was interested in. In the end, he would send people directly to accompany their ancestors. Sure enough, as soon as Eunuch Sun thought about it, Beligaju's cold and noble voice sounded. Take off your hair plume and clean it up. Don't get blood everywhere. It's very dirty. Yes. And Ying was like a ghost. Official Li and his son did not even have a chance to speak before they were dragged out of the tea house. The rest of the officials saw this and their scalps went numb. They immediately restrained their hands and feet. Beligaju just sat on the main seat and looked up. There's also the Wu family. The Wu family. Some people were puzzled and whispered. The Wu family did not even say anything. How did they offend the royal family? Beligaju chuckled coldly. How did he break his leg? I think you all know better than I do. He didn't know how to be honest in the barracks. After leaving the barracks, he still wants to take in concubines. Since he is so easy to make mistakes on this issue, then let him know his place. Cut off that thing of his and throw him into the dungeon. Eunuch's son was speechless. He thought that the marriage proposal was over, but it turned out that His Highness was waiting here. The others also felt that this matter was a bit strange. In the past, when the retired emperor came, he never asked anyone to accompany him. It was only this year that the Murong family, the Yuan family and their subordinates, the Li family and the Wu family all received the order to accompany them at the last minute. Now that he thought about it, he had a feeling that they had set up a trap long ago and were just waiting for them to fall into it. However, the retired emperor shouldn't have used this kind of method. If he wanted to take someone, under normal circumstances he would directly take that person with a knife. Why would he use such a silent and incomparably sinister method? Who was the mastermind behind this? The remaining Murong Chongfeng and the Yuan family's young master were all puzzled. They only felt a wave of uneasiness in their hearts. And Beligaju only held his teacup from beginning to end. His slender fingers supported his chin, looking indifferent and noble. Eunuch's son glanced at his master again. Speaking of which, the people who had fallen into the water this time seemed to be the people who had ridiculed eldest miss at White Academy. No, it couldn't be. Could it be that His Highness was angry because of a beauty? Eunuch's son choked on his own thoughts and kept coughing at the side. This word really didn't suit His Highness. Moreover, wasn't this anger a bit too late? Eunuch's son's face was full of doubt as he stared at Beligaju without blinking. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and said in a light tone, "If you want to cut the weeds and dig up the roots, of course you need time." Eunuch's son really was angry because of a beauty? Then His Highness and eldest miss, not waiting for him to open his mouth, Bailey Jiaju already stood up, narrowed his pair of peach blossom eyes, the bottom of his eyes flashing as he walked to a dark corner, and ordered Shadow, "Go check which seat she's sitting in." Yes. Shadow's figure flashed and entered the auction house. Night slowly descended. The auction officially began. However, the He family's second young master, who planned to have a date with Mei Mei, was stunned when he saw the person next to him. "Why is it you? Why can't it be me?" Hellion Vivian shook the wine cup in her hand and laughed lightly, "And this is really a good place. It's really suitable for two people to talk about love." He Zhe wrinkled his thick eyebrows and felt that there was a problem that needed to be explained. "That Weiwei, listen to me. Although I admire you, I don't have that kind of feeling towards you." Hellion Vivian's smile froze as if she was greatly hurt. "Then why did you say that you want to marry me into the He family?" "That's because..." He Zhe grabbed his long hair and suddenly had a kind of remorse of eating his own bitter fruit. He finally managed to crawl out from under the old man's nose today just to spend some time with that stupid woman who didn't get it. How did he end up meeting Weiwei? Also, she shouldn't have taken a fancy to him before, right? How come today? Could it be that the hint he gave before was really too obvious? He Zhe's heart was full of regret, but he was afraid that directly saying it would hurt Hellion Vivian's face. After scratching for a long time, he still couldn't come up with a reason. Hellion Vivian simply used her trump card. She buried her head to one side and her voice trembled slightly. It sounded like she was crying. "So you've been lying to me all this time. What a waste of my sincerity towards you." He Zhe was stupefied. He'd known Hellion Vivian for so long and had only seen her valiant and handsome. When had he ever seen her cry? I. He Zhe sat down dispiritedly. His fingers stroked Hellion Vivian's hair. "I'm a scoundrel." He originally wanted to confess and be lenient. Who knew that this scene in the eyes of the people who became two lovers who had just finished quarreling and were about to reconcile and warm. Eunuch's son's heart thumped loudly and subconsciously turned his head. Beligaju's silver mask looked colder than ever before. He faintly wrinkled his willowy eyebrows. His 10 ivory-like fingers tightly clasped the bag of armament parts that he'd just brought over to give to Hellion Vivian. His beautiful and sharp white teeth were slightly exposed. No matter how he tried, it couldn't conceal that heaven-destroying and earth-exterminating coldness. At this moment, the aura around his body was no longer indifferent. Instead, it contained a hidden chill. Even his smile was so cold that it made people's whole body tremble. Separated by the noisy crowd, Beligaju looked at the prey that should have been his, telling the truth to another man. It was just that one sentence that made Beligaju's chest tremble. It spread to him and even he couldn't understand it. His martial chi is going to disappear again. So what? Perhaps after his prey and her beloved reconcile, she won't think about the contract between them anymore. Then she'll think about how to tell him about this matter and then run away like last time. This series of conjectures reminded Beligaju again and again. The prey he had set his eyes on didn't belong to him. Chapter 226. That's right, she didn't like him and had even said bluntly that even after marriage she wouldn't care if he found someone else. That was all because she had he eyes in her heart. If he let go not long after, maybe old man Hay would agree to them being together, and then, in a fulfilling and happy life, she would gradually forget him as her master. Of course, he could also choose to completely lock her up before she privately pledged her life to another man. Beligaju had always been calm and graceful. But at this moment he had lost all reason. Bang! Only the crisp sound of a chair being slammed could be heard. Beligaju had already walked behind Hei's with large strides, and pulled Hellion Vivian behind him, almost unable to control himself from revealing his true face in front of the world. Hellion Vivian was just about to ask Hei's, "Why are you pulling me?" when she heard Hei's say in astonishment, "Royal?" Hellion Vivian hurriedly raised her head, and only then did she see who was pulling her. Beligaju's pitch-black eyes were currently looking at Hei's with frosty eyes, and the person he was looking at was one of the few people in the world who wouldn't be afraid of him. Hei's raised his eyebrows and his smile was quite thick. "Your Highness also heard that our shop is going to hold an auction, and specially came to support us?" "Hei's, you go back first, I want to talk to Royal alone again." Hellion Vivian wanted to send him away. After all, Royal had mentioned before that they didn't want to see her and Hei's involved, and she had violated this contract. Yet at this moment Hei's suddenly realized something and his finger pointed at Hellion Vivian. "You didn't cry, you were just playing with me." Beligaju listened to the two people bickering, and the smile at the corner of his mouth became even colder. Without giving Hellion Vivian a chance to reply, he directly imprisoned her in his arms, and pulled her to a private room at the side. All the armaments in the auction house seemed to have been shaken by something, and all of them emitted a faint white light. "What's going on?" People looked at the armaments they were carrying with them in bewilderment. At this time the fire Kylan suddenly appeared beside Beligaju in an invisible state. "Master, please calm down. If you can't control your current martial chi, all the blood vessels in your body will flow backwards. Your memory and soul are not complete yet. If this continues, your form will appear." Roar. The spirit beast beside an unknown person let out a low roar, as if it had sensed an unprecedented danger. It immediately revealed its form in the auction house and began to charge around violently. When the fire Chilan saw that it was in trouble, it hurriedly flew over and glared at the spirit beast. When it turned its head back, it was shocked. The wooden door of the private room was already cracked by Beligaju's martial chi. Hellion Vivian instinctively felt that something was wrong and wanted to push him away. Seeing this, the coldness on Beligaju's face grew thicker and thicker. Caught off guard, he couldn't control the strength of his palm and threw Hellion Vivian onto the soft couch. Clang! A loud sound echoed. Hellion Vivian only felt dizzy and her back was unbearably painful. She arched her body and glared at him like a knife. "Beligaju, are you crazy?" Beligaju didn't speak. He didn't even move. He only stood elegantly in the dark and narrowed his cold eyes. The few spirit beasts outside seemed to have received some kind of heavy punishment. Each of them hugged their own heads and rolled back and forth on the ground, causing an uproar. When Hellion Vivian propped herself up, she vomited a mouthful of blood. Beligaju looked at her and suddenly froze. He admitted that he had always been a cruel and ruthless person. But this time he actually hated the power he was born with. He didn't want to hurt her. However, when his martial chi surged, his mind seemed to surge with many memories that didn't belong to him. Those elders in wanton robes called him monster. His thoughts couldn't calm down no matter how hard he tried. It was as if they had noticed the danger that came from his body. Hellion Vivian frowned. Just as she reached out her hand, it was cut by the surging martial chi. She raised her eyes and looked at Beligaju's left shoulder with a surprised expression. A trace of astonishment flashed through her eyes. "Don't look at me like I'm a monster." Beligaju's fingers suddenly exerted force. Crack! A heavy crack appeared on one of the wooden beams above his head. Hellion Vivian jumped up. Without saying anything, she directly reached out her hands and hugged the man with the arrogant back. Together with him, the two of them rolled to a safe position. The surrounding martial chi disappeared in an instant. Everything returned to normal. Only a layer of the beam was broken and it didn't fall down. The spirit beasts also seemed to have been comforted. Their bodies shrunk and they licked their claws as if they didn't know what had just happened. Beligaju looked at the small face that was close at hand. Her warm and gentle breath filled his nose. Hellion Vivian's breath was slightly chaotic as she opened her mouth. What's going on? Do you want to destroy my martial arts practice? Then you should pay attention to protecting yourself, Your Highness. Beligage's eyes were slightly dazed. He suddenly smiled and reached out his hand to gently stroke Hellion Vivian's face. Such a delicate touch, such an intoxicating temperature. This is the prey that he had set his eyes on. Every time it happened it would surprise everyone. Protection? Although this word sounded a bit overconfident. However, it didn't matter. He liked it very much. It's just that this alone wasn't enough. Hellion Vivian looked at his eyes and sighed. The reason why I met with Heizei today was because this martial arts practice firm was opened by him and me together. I forgot to tell you. You won't mind, right? You shook off the shadows these past few days just so you could meet with him alone. You opened a shop but you never thought of telling me. Beligaju coldly asked. Is it because in your heart you don't want to let me know? Hellion Vivian, how much have you hidden from me? Or do you think that I'm not worthy of your trust and you're leaving yourself a way out? Hellion Vivian heard this and felt a little guilty. She didn't think too clearly but in her heart she really did want to keep a distance from Beligaju. Because she felt that it wasn't good for the two of them to be involved too much. Now that Beligaju had hit the nail on the head, she didn't have anything to hide. That's right, I'm indeed leaving myself a way out. Beligaju looked at the hand that was protecting him. He only faintly grunted and said, I know. Then he returned to his usual expressionless face. Hellion Vivian thought that the royal was more intelligent and easier to communicate with. As long as she said it, he would accept everything gracefully and indifferently. However, what Hellion Vivian didn't know was that just as she was smiling lightly at Beligaju, Beligaju made a decision. He was going to cut off all her escape routes. Then, she would only belong to him. Now he regretted that the old man locked him up and didn't let him see this martial arts before the auction. But it didn't matter. In any case, when the time came to auction he would get half of the price. 500,000 taels, start now. The small hammer in the manager's hand fell. Someone immediately stretched out his hand. Good, this guest bid 50 taels. Are there any higher bids? 510,000 taels. 52 taels, are there any more? 600,000 taels. 700,000 taels. Until Heizei called out 700,000 taels, no one continued to bid. Although that martial arts was good, one still had to consider the price. The martial arts that young Master Wu Shuang personally made were at most 1 million taels. 700,000 taels going once. 700,000 taels going twice. 1 million taels. Beligaju slowly walked out. His pair of eyes habitually half squinted, faintly glowing. 1 million taels. Everyone sucked in a deep breath. That was enough to buy a big house. This martial arts was worth so much money? When Heizei saw that the bidder was Beligaju, his eyebrows slightly raised. Was he planning to fight with him? 1,100,000 taels. Heizei raised his eyes and met Beligaju's line of sight. Beligaju brushed his sleeves. 2 million taels. Heizei instantly felt all of his blood rush to his head. I bid 3 million taels. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and sized Heizei up a few times. Sure enough, he didn't make another sound. The manager started to bid. 3 million taels going once. Heizei stared at Beligaju, but Beligaju didn't even move an inch. The manager continued. 3 million taels going twice. Hellion Vivian instantly wrinkled her eyebrows. This man shouldn't have been deliberately bidding from the start, right? Heizei was actually dizzy from the hard-won joy. He turned his head and proudly smiled at Hellion Vivian as if saying, how was it, Big Brother was awesome, right? I even got rid of the royal family. Beligaju looked at him and suddenly said indifferently, did you bring money? Heizei was instantly petrified in place. Beligaju continued to speak unhurriedly. It is said that old man He cut off your money. What are you going to use to pay for this auction? Heizei finally reacted. He was tricked by His Highness. Profound Heavens never accepted credit even if it was him. What should he do? 300 taels going thrice sold. Damn it! Heizei fiercely cursed. No matter how unwilling he was, he still had to brace himself and go up. Hellion Wei Wei silently looked at her good friend's collapsed handsome face and let out a long sigh. It was simply a complete defeat, a complete defeat. There was no other way. Heizei could only brace himself and find Naylan Hongye, and let the woman spend money to buy an armament for him. This was the first time he used a woman's money to buy something under the watchful eyes of so many people. His Highness simply didn't have good intentions. But for the next 4 armaments, Beligaju actually paid the highest price to buy them all and gave them to Hellion Vivian. This made Heizei even more certain that His Highness deliberately tricked him just now. Only why did he do this? Could it be because of Wei Wei? Chapter 228. 5 armaments, each sold for a sky-high price that exceeded people's imagination. Everyone said that this time Profound Heavens made a fortune. Hellion Vivian made a fortune. In this way, Profound Heavens with its special marketing methods, successfully obtained the same treatment as a century-old shop. Just the flow of that day's seat fee alone exceeded 5 million taels of silver. All the stewards counted the money until their hands went limp. Hellion Vivian smiled and drank a mouthful of tea, as if everything was within her expectations. But there was one point. Why did a certain highness give her all these armaments? Hellion Vivian glanced sideways and looked at the man sitting beside her. As if knowing what she was thinking, Beligaju faintly met her gaze and said in a cold tone, "Betrothal gift? Betrothal gift? Betrothal gift?" Hellion Vivian was slightly surprised. She really didn't think that she could get a betrothal gift. However, who would give armaments as a betrothal gift? What was the difference between this and a modern-day bridegroom giving a gun to the bride? Was the etiquette of the royal family so strange? Ahem, this is a bit strange as a betrothal gift. Hellion Vivian thought for a moment. On the day of the wedding, everyone else was wearing gold and silver. Only she was carrying 2 armaments in one hand. People who didn't know would think that she was looking for the royal family to fight. Embarrassing. Beligaju's long eyebrows slightly wrinkled. His voice was very slow and somewhat indifferent. Is it strange? Not really, the main thing is why you want to give me a betrothal gift. Hellion Vivian didn't finish her words. Beligaju elegantly interrupted her. I know. Hellion Vivian was very satisfied. Communicating with smart people was so convenient. She reckoned that the royal family also realized that there was no need for any betrothal gift between them. Anyway, the wedding was just a formality. In 2 days I will give you something else. Beligaju casually threw one of the armaments on the wooden table. It was as if he was saying that he would give her 1 tael of silver tomorrow. Something else. Hellion Vivian silently took back her words. His Highness must not be living in the same dimension as her. As for the invisible fire Qilin, it stood at the side and frowned in worry. Its master's meridians were all in chaos. It was afraid that it would have to disappear for a few more days to allow its master to recover by himself. However, during this period of time, the underlings of the 4 great clans were particularly powerful. Master. The fire Qilin's steady voice resounded in the fantasy space. What should we do next? Beligaju communicated with him using the stream of consciousness. Send all the secret guards to the Phoenix Tower. Leave a few people to guard the retired emperor. Yes. The fire Qilin lowered its eyes. For the first time it felt worried. According to the past, its master's eyes would go blind the next morning. It hoped that nothing bad would happen then. At night, in the protector's manor. Hellion Jiaoer was so jealous that her expression changed. She didn't know the relationship between Hellion Vivian and Beligaju, because they hadn't announced it yet. However, she had only heard that her sweetheart had actually bought 4 armaments from that bitch in one go. Hellion Jiaoer's heart seemed to be blocked by something. In addition to the matter that made her lose face today, right now, she simply couldn't wait to immediately tear Wei Wei into pieces. Mother, are you really going to let this bitch torment you like this? Hellion Jiaoer sat in front of Su Yenemo with red eyes. She even dares to have designs on the royal family now. Who knows when she will climb over our heads? Su Yenemo listened and a trace of malice flashed in her eyes. I used to think that she was immature. I didn't expect that this girl's thoughts were so big. Jiao don't worry. The position of the princess consort can only be yours. As for that little bastard, I have my ways. Mother, you've thought of a good idea. Helian Jiao's eyes lit up. Su Yenmo held the teacup in her hand and said in a sinister voice, since she has thoughts that she shouldn't have, then don't blame me for being ruthless. Even if she was chased out of the general's residence, I'm still her mother in name. Marriage is decided by the parents and the matchmaker. Mother has the final say on who she wants to marry. Mother, you're thinking of... Helian Jiao couldn't help but stand up from the chair, her face brighter than before. Su Yenmo patted her hand. There are still 2 days before the martial chi competition. Although it's a little rushed, it's enough to pick a suitable man for that little bastard. Mother, where do you have anyone on hand? Helian Jiao bit her thin lips, afraid that it wouldn't be possible. Besides, no one is willing to marry that ugly woman. Su Yenmo smiled. Silly girl, that was in the past. Now that she's rich, there are plenty of people who want her money. Helian Jiao was stunned, then threw herself into Su Yenmo's arms. Mother, you have a way. That young master Huainan that someone introduced to your third sister last time is not bad. Su Yenmo was calculating in her heart. That person is handsome and has a way with this kind of ugly woman. I'll go to the Hui family later to write an invitation. Helian Jiao snorted. Mother, last time you said that young master Huainan was unreliable. Other than his face, he only knows how to eat, drink and play. He relies on women all day long. Don't look at how he's relying on his family's money now. If someone really marries him in the future, there won't be a corpse left. You told third sister not to interact with him to avoid ruining her reputation. Why is it that when it comes to that little bitch, your words are different? Su Yenmo knocked her head, the corner of her mouth became more sinister. If I don't say that, others will think that I'm mistreating that little bastard. The better I praise that young master Huainan, the easier this matter will be. Don't worry, other than mother, no one knows what kind of person that young master Huainan is. Mother, you really dug a good hole. Helian Jiao's eyes flashed with malice. Let's see what you, Helian Vivian, will do now. The next day, White Academy. A cool breeze blew gently. At a corner of the inferior compound, Helian Vivian was making the final adjustments to her umbrella, thinking that it would come in handy during the martial chi competition. Yuan Ming was lazily floating on the branches of a tree, basking in the sun. Of course, he was in stealth mode. The sun was just right. Helian Vivian had just finished adjusting her umbrella and was about to stretch when she saw a slender and elegant figure above her head. That figure was dressed differently from usual. His eyes were covered with a piece of white cloth. His face was so perfect that it made the morning sun behind him a little pale. Helian Vivian stopped her movements and frowned at him. What happened to your eyes? Beligaju avoided the sound and leaned over to her side, his voice lazy. I've been poisoned. Poisoning can hurt the eyes. Helian Vivian raised her eyebrows. Beligaju made a sound of acknowledgement and then smiled devilishly. So, I'll have to trouble my patron to take care of me in the future. What if Miss Weiwei enters and gets bullied? See, Miss Weiwei's fate has followed along. The Huayan family in the capital that makes silk and satins, their ancestors are also officials. Their status and position are all compatible with Miss Weiwei. The key is that this Master Huayan is very attentive to Miss Weiwei. He has already inquired about you many times from this old woman. His appearance is also very handsome, that kind of elegant gentleman's appearance in the entire capital. He can be ranked as one of the top. Yet he is interested in you. Tell me, isn't this a good news? Hearing that, before Helian Vivian could open her mouth, and Ying was completely stunned. This person, was she here to propose marriage for the future princess? He paused, raised his eyes and looked at Bailey Jiaju, only to see that his master's handsome face didn't have any expression, especially after the gauze covered his eyes. The only thing that Shadow could see was his cold thin lips. Helian Vivian raised the corner of her eyes, the light in her eyes slightly cold. This Master Huayan that you're talking about, I've never heard of him. How can you say it's a good news? Grandma Zhang exclaimed, Miss Weiwei, don't be anxious, Master Huayan will be here soon. Hearing the other side deliberately distorting her words, and even shouting loudly, she simply wanted to make the whole White Academy know. Helian Vivian looked at her, suddenly sneered, and lifted her foot to kick that Grandma Zhang's body. Grandma Zhang did not expect that Hellion Vivian would be so ruthless. Her forehead heavily knocked on the tree, and she could only hold her stomach and wail in pain. Hellion Vivian pinched her chin and said fiercely, "If I hear you say one more word, I will cut off that tongue of yours that likes to spread rumors and feed it to the dogs." Grandma Zhang was completely frightened by the coldness in Hellion Vivian's eyes. How could she have that kind of gaze, as if she wanted to kill her? Grandma Zhang's heart was greatly shocked, and her whole body was unusually cold. Her whole body seemed to have suddenly fallen into an ice cave, and she did not dare to say anything more. She even regretted accepting this business deal. At this time, a person walked over from afar, dressed in brocade and satin, holding a folding fan in his hand, fair and clean with a somewhat elegant appearance. Seeing old lady Zhang lying on the ground, that pair of eyes looked at Hellion Weiwei again, with gentleness like water. "Miss Weiwei, you're still the same as when I first saw you, straightforward and lawless. But don't blame old lady Zhang, I was too anxious, so I asked her to speak on my behalf. I'm afraid Miss Weiwei has already forgotten about me after all. At that time, you only had Lord Murong in your heart." After that, that person seemed to be hurt and sighed deeply. At this time there were many students surrounding them. Looking at this scene, there was no one who was not moved by this man's words. Chapter 230. This woman was the object of their collective ridicule. Every time she saw young Master Murong, she couldn't even take her eyes off him. Unfortunately, she had such a horrible appearance. If he didn't know that she was now rich and had become the boss of Profound Heaven, he wouldn't even want to look at her ugly face. Presumably, after hearing what he said, she would definitely be overjoyed and agree to this marriage. His trick had deceived a lot of people. Even the real third miss of the general's residence had been hooked up by him, not to mention the leftover woman who had been driven out. Thinking of this, the man's smile became even wider. Yet he didn't know that within Wei Wei's youthful appearance, there wasn't a hazy young girl, but rather a queen of arms who specialized in dealing with all kinds of big venues. Huaiyan's trick of seducing people was simply not enough for Hellion Vivian. "Since you know that I don't even recognize you, then why don't you hurry up and get lost?" Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes, like a cat that was about to stretch out its claws. Huaiyan's face stiffened. He didn't expect to get such an answer. This was simply like slapping his face in front of everyone. Since this trick of being gentle like water didn't work, Huaiyan simply sneered, "You want me to get lost? The general's residence has already accepted my betrothal gift, and now you want me to get lost? Where is the matchmaker's word in the world?" Everyone looked at each other. According to reason, once the betrothal gift was accepted, it meant that she agreed and had to marry. Otherwise she would be reprimanded by the world. Hellion Vivian originally didn't care about this kind of thing, but when she thought of the royal family once said something to her about reputation, she could only restrain her temper and didn't wave her fist at Huaiyan's face. Carefully thinking about it, this marriage proposal came too suddenly. She had just announced her identity, and there was this kind of shameless man who came up and said that he had already given her betrothal gift. No matter how she looked at it, there was someone who deliberately wanted to marry her off. As for this young Master Huaiyan in front of her, she reckoned that he was a scumbag with a golden exterior and rotten interior. If she married over, not only would he not treat her well, he might have other ideas about her. And the person who arranged all this had already accepted the betrothal gift early, just so that she wouldn't have the chance to refuse. What a vicious mind. Hellion Vivian's gaze turned cold as she swept a glance at the accessories on young Master Huaiyan's waist. The corner of her mouth curled up. "The betrothal gift you mentioned, I haven't even seen it. Go find whoever received it." "You want to go back on your word?" Huaiyan took a step forward. "Now my betrothal gifts are still in the general's residence. Madame Su has already arranged them for you, waiting for you to get married. Weiwei, why are you so stubborn and unwilling to believe that I will treat you well?" Huaiyan was smart and knew how to be firm first and then soft. This way it wouldn't sound too harsh in the ears of others. They would only think that Hellion Vivian used the betrothal gift and didn't admit it. It wouldn't be a big deal if he had only accepted her, but he had already arranged everything properly. It was equivalent to accepting this marriage. No matter what he said, it would be Hellion Vivian's fault. Hellion Vivian sneered, "Since Mrs. Su is the one who received and arranged the gifts, why don't you marry her?" "Hellion Vivian, you. Huayan was so angry that he almost couldn't maintain his demeanor. Finally, he took a deep breath. How can you say such things? It's too disappointing. Hearing this, everyone also shook their heads. They thought that even if this Hellion Vivian was promising, she was also vicious. Her stepmother was so good to her and even arranged her marriage for her. Not only did she not know how to be grateful, but she also didn't know what was good for her. At this time, Hellion Jiaoer and Hellion Mei also came. Hellion Jiaoer saw Grandma Zhang, who was kicked to the ground by Hellion Vivian, and exclaimed, "What's going on? Grandma Zhang, didn't you come to propose marriage for young Master Huayan? How did it become like this?" Miss Jiaoer. Old Madame Zhang looked as if she had just seen her family member. She wiped the blood from the corner of her mouth and said, "What sins did I, Old Madame Zhang, commit in my previous life? I was kind enough to help, but I was beaten up. I've said so many things, but I've never seen anyone like this." Old Madame Zhang originally wanted to call her a little slut, but when she met Hellion Wei Wei's eyes, her whole body shivered. She abruptly changed her words and called out, "Eldest Miss Hellion, it's so hard to talk to her." Hellion Jiaoer was like a fairy. She wiped old Madame Zhang's face with a handkerchief pitifully. Then she turned to Hellion Wei Wei and said, "Eldest sister, old Madame Zhang has good intentions. How can you treat her like this? Mother has been looking for a marriage for you. It's fine if you don't care about it, but you also made everyone so embarrassed." Hey. Hellion Vivian's mouth hooked up. Kind enough to introduce a man who is flirting with third sister to me? What kind of thoughts does she have? If people don't know, they would think that I, Hellion Vivian, am a love-struck fool who wants to steal my sister's man. I'm not like you, unable to lay hands on my sister's man. Hellion Vivian's words slapped three people's faces at the same time. Everyone knew that Hellion Jiaoer didn't want to mention that she did have the intention to steal Hellion Vivian's marriage, but because of the royal family's consort selection, she immediately withdrew. The fishy nature of this matter couldn't stand up to scrutiny. And because Hellion Mei had a guilty conscience, she shouted loudly, "Who are you saying is hooking up with who? Hellion Vivian, I'm warning you, don't make slanderous accusations." Slanderous accusations? Hellion Vivian suddenly moved her feet and brushed past Huayan. She opened her left hand and there was a well-made purse in her palm. "Third sister, your name is written on this. Why is it hanging on this man?" Hellion Mei's face changed. Even Hellion Jiaoer didn't know that there would be such a matter. Turning her head, she looked towards Hellion Mei and clenched her teeth. This person was unable to accomplish anything, but good at spoiling things. She actually made such a big mistake. An unmarried woman's purse was hanging on a man's body. This matter didn't need to be said, everyone knew what was going on. They all looked at Hellion Mei and Huayan's face didn't look good, and he reached out to take the purse in Hellion Vivian's hand. Unexpectedly, Hellion Wei Wei just shook her head and grabbed his arm. With a beautiful backswing, she threw Huayan to the ground. Then she handsomely pinched Huayan's throat with her fingers and said in a cold voice, "How dare you say that you like me and want to marry me? Do you really think that I, Hellion Vivian, am a fool? It's obviously profitable. Tell me who gave you the idea and what about those betrothal gifts?" Chapter 231. Huayan gritted his teeth and didn't speak. Hellion Vivian smiled coldly and put more strength into her hand. "You still don't want to talk?" Huayan endured the pain and denied, "I don't understand what you are talking about. Hellion Vivian, why do you have to be so vicious? You always misinterpret others." Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and didn't do anything. "Let me do it." Beligaju, who was standing on the side, opened his mouth with a faint smile on his thin lips. "How can you be so rude to a guest?" Hellion Vivian paused and raised her eyebrows at Beligaju. This brother is more reasonable. Huayan thought he was saved and was about to stand up. However, the man whose eyes were covered by the white cloth slowly took off the white gloves on his hands and directly grabbed his dislocated arm. Creak. It made things worse. It was more painful than dislocating a person's arm. Huayan was in so much pain that he was about to faint. Beligaju hit his acupoints so that he wouldn't faint even if he was in extreme pain. To put it simply, it made people feel this bone-piercing pain at all times. Then he continued to pinch Huayan's other arm unhurriedly. He curved his thin lips in self-reproach and said in distress, "Oh, I seem to have grabbed the wrong arm. This one is good." Creak. As soon as his voice fell, Huaiyan's body stiffened. Huaiyan's entire body arched and the cold sweat on his forehead instantly slid down. Ah. Does it hurt now? Beligaju moved his fingers with a faint smile. When he lowered his eyes, Huaiyan almost had the illusion that he was looking at a demon. Even if he was so handsome that he was harmless, Huaiyan still wanted to escape. Yes, his first reaction was to run away. Fear was the only thought in his mind. However, he couldn't even move. A murderous voice rang in his ears, as if it was demanding his life. Then you still dare to come and propose marriage? Creak. Another crisp sound rang out. It was so loud and merciless that the people standing around trembled. Huaiyan cried. What happened to not being rough? Which subordinate did you use as a betrothal gift? Beligaju picked him up with one hand and looked at Huaiyan mockingly. The cloth was wrapped around his eyes, giving people a sense of sanctity. Huaiyan stammered, left hand. Oh? He watched as Beligaju lifted his foot and was about to step on his left hand. Huaiyan immediately changed his words. He curled up on the ground and begged for mercy. No, I have never given any betrothal gifts. This was all Madame Su's idea. As he spoke, he retreated backwards. His face was covered in tears and snot, and he no longer had the flirtatious appearance from before. Hellion Vivian frowned in disgust and reached out to grab his collar. You'd better make it clear, otherwise, I'll say it. Huaiyan was afraid that Beligaju would lay hands on him again. He said with tears in his eyes, it was Madame Su who found me. I didn't want to at first, but she said that as long as I married you, I could get half of Profound Heaven's industry. Then I was moved. Hearing this, everyone knew what was going on. They looked at Huaiyan with eyes full of shock. Half of Profound Heaven's industry? You deserve it? Hellion Vivian sneered. What's the matter with that purse? Huaiyan glanced at Hellion Mei. Hellion Mei was anxious and wanted to walk over. Unfortunately, Shadow happened to be blocking in front of her. She could only hold on to her two arms and like a shrew roared, Hellion Wei. Hellion Vivian was unmoved. She coldly and arrogantly squeezed Huaiyan's arm and said, say it. Mayor and I have privately pledged to be together for life, but Madame Su didn't agree, so Mayor gave her purse to me and asked me to wait for her. Chapter 232. She was the apple of her eye since she was young. Although she was not as good as Jiao Er, she was also Madame Su's favorite. This cut was already painful to the point of anger. Good, what a little bitch. Madame Su's eyes were murderous. Listening to Hellion Mei's crying, her heart was even more angry and painful. If it wasn't for the fact that they were in the White Academy, she could still deny it. However, so many people were listening. If she did not marry her mother over, she would be pointed at behind her back and scolded to death by the people in the capital. There was no other way. Madame Su could only try to comfort Hellion Mei and help her with the dowry. However, how could Madame Su take this lying down? She carefully raised these two girls. Which one of them was not the best in the capital? In the future, at least they could marry into a noble family, but now they were only concubines of a businessman. The Hui family looked good on the surface, but in fact they had lost all their money, and when they married they had to subsidize them from time to time. Su Yenmo's heart hurt more than if someone killed her. It made her feel worse. Go write a letter to the Prime Minister. Su Yenmo sneered. That brat Hellion Wei won't be able to use it. Jiao Er's blood is enough and the fusion rate is also very good. If we keep that bastard, it will only become a disaster. Yes. The woman dressed as a mammy retreated. Su Yenmo looked at the teacup in her hand and used a lot of force. Little bastard, your death date is coming soon. Those people, they are all gold peak. At dusk, Yuan Xiaoming chewed on the grass in his mouth and said casually, Woman, your method is really ruthless, killing without blood. The pain they added to my body, how can it be exchanged with a simple death? Wei Wei put down the armament in her hand. Don't forget, the reason why I was able to raise you was precisely because of this heart of poison. Yuan Xiaoming smiled evilly. Then what are you going to do next? Now it's almost time to start to seize power, right? After the martial chi test, the people in the family will choose a new family head. Hellion Vivian twirled the silver in her hand. If I become the third princess consort and win the martial chi test, no matter how many people rely on me, they can only shut up. Yuan Xiaoming's thin lips slightly hooked. So this is your idea. It's also because they thought that you couldn't go back after being expelled from the family. But they didn't know that you had already obtained the qualifications to participate in the martial chi competition in the guise of a beggar. This also means that you have automatically returned to the Hellion family's genealogy. The reason why Su Yenimo is so arrogant is because she is backed by the Su family. I've always felt that there's a pair of invisible hands behind the Su family controlling everything. Otherwise, just based on Su Yenmo's one or two moves, how could my Hellion family be reduced to such a state? Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. When I was young, I didn't remember, but I always knew that my grandfather was powerful. He was resourceful and not in a hurry. It's not an exaggeration to describe him. No matter how I think about it, it shouldn't be this end. Yuan Xiaoming's eyes lit up. So, you plan to take it one step at a time and force out the behind-the-scenes manipulator? Hellion Vivian faintly hummed and her eyes were long. I will never let go of anyone who has hurt my family. Then let me see how far you can go. Yuan Ming's silver pupils were half-hooked, showing his bloodthirsty demonic nature. That night, the Huai family welcomed a distinguished guest. The royal family with a silver mask said that they were going to give a big gift to the Huai family. The Huai family felt that this was a blessing in disguise and quickly came out to greet them. Who knew that they would receive a pair of scissors from Eunuch Sunday? The royal family's original words were, "In order to make your son more obedient, cut off his superfluous things, so that he won't go out in the future to indulge in wine and women, and let the Hellion third miss down." Huayan was so scared that his face changed. He screamed in horror and rolled on the ground. The royal family just looked at him indifferently. When they passed by, they only left a few cold words. Is her betrothal gift something you can give? Unfortunately, Huayan didn't hear this sentence clearly, so when he became half-disabled, he didn't know how he had offended the royal family. As for Hellion Mei, who had originally already calmed down and was preparing to marry, after hearing this news, her entire person was stupefied. How was this good for her? It was clear that she was going to be a widow after marrying. An immoral man she married. But the royal family's words were so beautiful that they didn't even have room to struggle. Su Yenimo, who had planned it all out, sat on the wooden chair in a daze. The maid hurried in and said that the elixir shop that she had invested a lot of money in recently was found to be problematic and had been sealed by the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs. Sealed? Su Yenimo murmured in a daze. How is this possible? Does the Prime Minister know? The maid hung her head. The Prime Minister can't control it, as ministers can't run a shop privately. How could Su Yenimo not know this? However, in her impression, the people from the Ministry of Official Personnel Affairs had never dared to touch her. That was why she had invested all her belongings in the elixir shop, intending to make a huge profit. She thought that even that little bitch could make money. She had so many connections, she would definitely earn more than her. But now, gone, everything is gone. Su Yenimo stood up and threw the teacup in front of her. Go and tell the Prime Minister to kill that bitch immediately. Yes. The maid was so scared that she quickly left. But almost everyone in the capital knew what Su Yenimo had done. Not only was she harsh to her stepdaughter, but she was also thinking about the money of a stepdaughter who had been kicked out of the house. She was simply shameless. On the surface, no one said anything, but behind the scenes they had already started to talk about it. This was the effect that Hellion Vivian wanted, to kill with a nod of the head. To deal with people like Su Yenimo, it was necessary to kill her bit by bit. Hellion Wei Wei put away the umbrella in her hand and strolled back into the courtyard. Her blood vessels started to faintly heat up. Finally, it was time for the martial chi competition. Before the competition, every participant had to collect their number 1 day in advance, and only when their number was called would they go on stage. Hellion Vivian originally wanted to go on her own, but when she went down the mountain she happened to bump into her desk mate, who was looking sideways and giving orders to the servant who usually followed her around. Hellion Vivian felt that this scene was slightly familiar, but she couldn't remember where she had seen it before. When Beligaju turned around, his expressionless face made Hellion Vivian feel that it was unfamiliar. Who's there? Even his voice was a little cold. Chapter 233. Hellion Vivian rubbed the bridge of her nose and walked out. It's me, Sugar Daddy. When Beligage's eyes were covered with the white cloth, he looked extremely clean and harmless. He was like a jade-like young master, peerless and magnificent. Hellion Vivian was helpless. I told you not to call me that. What were you and your servant talking about? You were so mysterious. Something might happen at home tomorrow, so I let him go back. Beligaju's voice was very light. Hellion Vivian had already thought that he was like her when he entered the school. His family's power was seized, so she understood and didn't continue to ask. She only asked, "What will you do if he leaves? Your eyes haven't recovered yet, right?" "I don't know." Beligaju slightly tilted his head, looking a little proud. "I'll probably have to stay in the school for the whole day." His Highness is definitely pretending. Shadow raised his eyes and looked at the sky. Because he was the one who sent him away. Hellion Vivian looked at her deskmate and thought for a moment. "Why don't you follow me down the mountain? Will I disturb you?" Beligaju fully demonstrated his politeness when necessary. However, this kind of politeness made Hellion Vivian even more feel that she should bring her deskmate along. "No, I'm just going down the mountain to get a token anyway." "Okay." Beligaju smiled and looked at his hand again. His voice was very pleasant. "It's just that I can't see right now, so it's not very convenient for me to walk." Hellion Vivian was a person of action. When she heard him say that, she directly walked over and held his hand. She walked forward without looking back, natural and handsome with a peaceful face. Beligaju paused for a moment, then the corner of his mouth curved up. That curve was called "Evil Plan Succeeded." The evening light shone down, elongating their shadows. The students coming and going could see that on the bluestone slope where Lin Ying went down the mountain in groups. A gentle breeze blew and white petals fell. A girl with slightly dark skin was holding the hand of a young man who was so handsome that even heaven and earth paled in comparison. Their green and white robes fluttered gently as they were entangled together. They had been together for thousands of years. When Hellion Vivian received her token, she received it from the commoners. Along the way, she didn't see any familiar faces. They were all young men and women selected from various places. No one knew each other, so no one was surprised to see Hellion Vivian here. Hellion Vivian was also successful in getting the tag, but her deskmate's face was too eye-catching. She was surrounded by a group of people in no time. "By the way, why aren't you participating in the martial chi competition?" Hellion Vivian seemed to have thought of something. She turned sideways and looked at her deskmate with a hint of doubt in her eyes. Beligaju thought for a moment and looked very serious. "My eyes are injured. I can't participate in the competition." If Hellion Vivian knew his identity, she would definitely know that he was lying. But now Hellion Vivian only thought that he wanted to become famous in the martial chi competition just like her. She didn't expect that he would be so unlucky as to hurt his eyes. At that moment she could only feel deep sympathy. She didn't say anything and continued to walk forward holding his hand. However, she didn't notice that Beligaju was slightly scheming. He knew that the prey he had set his eyes on had a fatal weakness. A stubborn and playful fox. Her claws were hard, but the pads were too soft. As long as you mastered the right method, you could play with them in the palm of your hand. He was the same. The night was getting darker. When the two of them walked back, there weren't many people on the mountain road. Hellion Vivian hummed a song. Her voice was clear and the lines were deep. It was very pleasant to hear. "You know, I always think about the unhappy 15-year-old you. How I want to hold the crying you in my arms. Not sure of my shape, whether I can move or not, colliding with the world. Those wounds I finally healed one by one for you. One day I will grow old. I hope you will be satisfied. I didn't let down that 15-year-old, rarely seen." Bailey Jaju restrained that icy coldness of his. He tilted his head to the side and listened quietly. A ray of light flashed through those pair of deep eyes hidden under the white cloth. It was because he couldn't see that he was able to listen carefully. He had never heard such lyrics and music before. Even the musicians in the palace or other countries didn't know how to sing. "Then, Hellion Vivian, where did you learn these things?" It seemed that the prey he had set his eyes on had more secrets than he thought. Beligaju clenched his left hand. "What's wrong?" Hellion Vivian looked back and raised her eyebrows. Bailey Jaju replied slowly, "It's nothing. You sing very well." Hellion Vivian paused and smiled. "I just hummed a few lines. How can it be considered a song? I heard it sung by others and thought it sounded good." Maintaining vigilance at all times, this was Hellion Wei. If it was someone else, they might be fooled by her words. However, she didn't know that the person standing in front of her was very scheming and ruthless. How could he be fooled with just a few words? "Is that so?" Bailey Jiaju curved his thin lips meaningfully. Hellion Vivian wanted to say something. All of a sudden her ears moved. She nimbly extended her hand and pulled Bailey Jiaju. At the same time, the umbrella in her other hand had already opened. In a flash, the concealed weapons fell one after another. Hellion Vivian felt an unprecedented sense of oppression. She wanted to mobilize all the martial qi to summon Yuan Xiaoming, but found that there was a ghostly figure behind her. Careful. Baligaju reached out to block. Without martial qi, his arm was scratched with a thick blood mark. A gloomy laughter sounded from the night, like the terrible hoarseness of a snake slipping through the grass, accompanied by the cry of an owl from time to time, which made people feel creepy from the bottom of their hearts in the dark night. Hellion Vivian leaned to one side. Because she was holding someone in her hand, she couldn't launch her martial qi at all. This was her only weakness at present. When operating the wind, she had to be alone. But now, this weakness had become her fatal wound. Such a girl and a boy are not worthy of our help. Among the swaying shadows of the trees, a person with sallow skin and slightly green cheeks appeared in midair. Even though his face wasn't very ugly, but that pair of eyes carried a gloomy aura that made people feel extremely uncomfortable. Especially the pointed fingers that were exposed under his black robe, even more so made Wei Wei's willowy eyebrows wrinkle heavily. Moreover, they were not alone. Chapter 234. Ding Ling. The crisp sound of the metal bell was like a small ripple on the surface of a lake that was suddenly hit by raindrops. It abruptly spread out in the air, and the air that suddenly quieted down was filled with a kind of awe-inspiring atmosphere. She didn't know why, but every time the bell rang, the air that blew on her back became colder, just like a cold ghost. Hellion Vivian keenly felt that the surrounding temperature was rising at an imperceptible speed. Another person wearing a black robe walked over from afar. His face was covered by a cloak and it was impossible to see his face clearly. However, the scepter in his hand was very special. On top of the scepter there was a bright red eye. She didn't know what kind of animal it was. Wherever he went, the temperature was as hot as magma, making people unable to get close. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes. It was actually a peak gold rank. The other party's strength was much higher than hers. She once heard from Elder Huan that those who reached the peak of the gold rank would possess spiritual power. They would adjust their own martial qi according to their own martial practice, making it appear real and substantial. If one wanted to understand this method, they would need to possess a strong and pure enough martial qi, have a long enough lifespan to practice, and possess a superhuman perception in order to succeed. Those who broke through the peak of the gold rank were basically existences at the bone ash level. Even in the entire Dragon War Empire, there were only a few of them. And at this moment the two people standing in front of Hellion Vivian were actually both peak gold rank. As the surrounding temperature became higher and higher, the brand under the black-robed person's feet became clearer and clearer. Clusters of flames rose from the ground. The legendary Purgatory Flame. Only the Fire Qilin could resist this attack. It was said that all living things that were placed in the Purgatory Flame would be burned to ashes by the Purgatory Flame. If other people saw this scene, they would definitely think of a way to escape. However, Hellion Vivian didn't let go of Baligaju's hand. This way it would definitely be difficult to fight. Only a few banging sounds could be heard. Although Hellion Vivian's small face didn't change much, a trace of blood flowed out from the corner of her mouth. It was as easy as stepping on an ant for the two of them to deal with her. Your bones are quite tough. The man in black smiled coldly and raised the staff in his hand. Since you can use a body without the slightest bit of martial qi to receive this move of mine, but this time, you won't be so lucky. The black-clothed person leaped up. The flames around his body transformed into a scarlet flame beast that flapped its wings and broke free from the sea of fire. It opened its bloody mouth and circled back and forth, howling as it spat out raging flames, ferociously pouncing toward Wei Wei. If it was an ordinary person, they would have already been burned into a pile of ashes. However, Hellion Wei Wei used the umbrella in her hand and rotated the angle with one hand, blocking those raging flames. Bang! Blood's blood. The two people didn't give her any time to think. As soon as one person finished his attack, the other grabbed towards Hellion Vivian's back. Baligaju listened to the sound of the wind around him and turned around. He held Hellion Vivian in his arms and rolled towards the bushes at the side. Damn it! I actually missed. A blind person's reaction is actually so fast. The black-robed person with long black fingernails clenched his hands in displeasure. Looking at the person who quickly disappeared into the night, a trace of malice flashed in his eyes. The person with the scepter raised his eyes, his voice indifferent and filled with a thick aura of death. If they roll down from here, it will be a cliff. Perhaps they would have already been smashed to pieces. That girl is a good seedling. She can actually receive 2 of my attacks. If you weren't here, perhaps she could have received a few more of my attacks. Unfortunately, she was so blind and blocked the path of the Phoenix girl. Who's that brat beside her? His reaction is quite fast. Don't worry about it. Anyway, they won't survive. Drip, drip. Water dripped on her face. When Hellion Vivian woke up, her first reaction was to look at her tablemate. The cloth covering the man's eyes was still on, but the side of his face was scratched by a rock. He probably got injured while protecting her when they rolled down. His arm also needed to be bandaged. But obviously there weren't any healing herbs here. They seemed to have fallen into a cave, and below them were cliffs and precipices. These precipices became a natural barrier against the wind, and the inside of the cave was another lush scene. There was a high-hanging waterfall on the cliff that flowed down into the pool. Surrounded by green trees, the pool was clear and bright, like a piece of transparent crystal. There was no way to walk in front. Hellion Vivian tried to move her arms and legs. Her limbs were limp as if they had been crushed, but there was no pain. First she took out a pill and made the man swallow it. Then she glanced at the black blood flowing out of his arm. Without any hesitation she lowered her head and sucked the blood out, spitting it to the side. It was indeed poisonous. But fortunately the poison didn't enter the bone. According to reason, it should be her injury that was more serious. It was just that at the moment of falling he had been protecting her with himself, so he was in such a mess. Hellion Vivian was grateful, but at the same time she was a little worried. She called Yuan Ming several times, but that guy seemed to be dead. Was there a problem with this cave? Speaking of which, even when they were fighting on the mountain just now, Yuan Ming couldn't wake up. In other words, there was indeed a problem here. However, as long as she was not dead, everything was not over yet. However, she didn't have much time to waste. Tomorrow was the martial chi competition. If she didn't show up on time, she would be judged to automatically withdraw from the competition. Then her long-term efforts would be ruined. Hellion Weiwei lowered her head and looked at the bottomless cliff below her feet. She decided to first recover, then solve this matter. She slowly closed her eyes. Her thoughts moved slightly and she felt as if there was an extra kind of gas in her body, like a stream of water trickling through, warming her whole body. Hellion Vivian spread the airflow to the major acupoints around her body, trying to change their positions so that she could break through the choking point and reach a new height. However, there was a sharp pain in her chest and various acupoints. The blood in her whole body began to surge restlessly, as if it was going to burst out of the skin. Hellion Vivian endured the pain, stubbornly refusing to restrain the airflow that was getting more and more out of control. Then she suddenly exhaled and her whole body overflowed with a colorless light. As if it had sensed this light, a faint sigh suddenly came from within the cave. Chapter 235. It's been 10 years. For the past 10 years, no one has entered this place. Just as I'm about to pass away, someone has entered. Could this be the will of the heavens? That old and gentle voice echoed in the valley. It was as if a senior monk was reciting sutras in the morning. The sound of Buddha's voice was steady and steady. The cliff of reflection was very steep. The distance from the bottom to the top was more than 10,000 feet. Even if a person with peerless martial arts jumped down, there was no place for him to lean on. He would be smashed into meat paste by the force of the fall. Furthermore, this place was surrounded by mountains. The terrain was extremely dangerous. No one had ever reached the bottom of the cliff. Then why was there someone in this cave? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Her pair of phoenix eyes turned sharp. Let's go in. A slightly cold voice sounded from the side of her ear. Only then did Hellion Weiwei discover that her desk mate had already woken up. That handsome and fair face was still stained with bloodstains. Under his ink-black hair was a pure white cloth. It just so happened to cover his eyes. Not only did it not make him lose a trace of his bearing, it instead made him look more demonic and soul-stirring. Hellion Vivian nodded. Naturally, she reached out and grabbed his arm. Her voice was clear. Watch your feet. There are vines. Baligaju's lips curled. When he walked over, he tried to use the martial chi in his body. His thin lips carried a faint smile. When the two of them went through the cave, they had to bend down. When they were close, Hellion Vivian felt as if her entire body was being pulled into the embrace of the person behind her. Especially when his breath brushed past her ear from time to time, it made her subconsciously shrink her neck. She didn't know if it was because he couldn't see, but when his hand reached out from behind, it seemed to slide past the softness in front of her chest. Hellion Vivian felt that it was too embarrassing to talk about such things, so she could only silently change her position. She directly held his finger, went around the surrounding vines and pushed aside the weeds. She saw an old man in a kasaya sitting in the middle of the cave with his head slightly lowered. If he hadn't been talking just now, it would have been very easy for others to mistake him for a corpse. Especially at this time, his hair had already grown to his waist, and his white hair covered his eyes. So there are two people? Hellion Vivian didn't ask him how he found out that they were two people. After all, anyone who could live in this place for so many years without dying of old age must have something special about them. Why aren't you talking? The old man tilted his head, his white hair fluttering in the wind. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. I just fell. I'm still adapting. The old man was taken aback before he suddenly laughed. This is the first time this penniless monk has seen such an open-minded person. Young lady, one of you is injured? The smell of blood is a little too strong. Hellion Vivian glanced at Baligaju's arm. Yes, it's a minor injury. When she was outside, she was used to speaking half-truths. The old man didn't mind and only said, Young lady, I want you to do this penniless monk a favor. Baligaju frowned and didn't say anything. Hellion Vivian laughed. That depends on what kind of favor it is. The old man's laughter became deeper. Young lady, you are really interesting. Since you feel that this penniless monk is in danger, why don't you just help this penniless monk? Why do you need to see what kind of favor it is? When interacting with others, one should be vigilant to protect oneself. But if it's within one's capabilities, one should help as much as possible. Hellion Vivian's words were indifferent, but it was her way of doing things. The old man was surprised by Hellion Vivian's intelligence and didn't take it to heart. A hint of admiration appeared in his eyes. If it's you, you should deliver this penniless monk's message. Message? What message? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Master, what you want me to do is to help you deliver a message. But the problem is that we can't even protect ourselves. Whether we can get out or not is another matter. The old man laughed. The entrance of Fox Valley opens once every month on the day of the full moon. It only lasts for a short 2 hours. According to Fushi's technique, the entrance is a path of reincarnation with 9 deaths and 1 life. There are 9 paths that lead to the netherworld, and only one of them can successfully enter the valley. Since you can enter, I believe that you have the ability to leave. Hellion Vivian was speechless. We just happened to fall in. The old man shook his head. It's not a coincidence, it's the will of the heavens. When this penniless monk fell into this valley, this penniless monk used his remaining spiritual power to make a final prophecy. In the prophecy, this penniless monk once said that there would be a fated person and that all he had to do was wait. However, 1 year after another passed. It's been a full 10 years. Just when this penniless monk thought that this penniless monk would be buried with this secret, the two of you appeared. Hellion Vivian didn't believe in this, but she had to think of a way to get out. After some thought, she said, if I can get out, I'll definitely deliver Master's message. The two of you will definitely be able to get out. The old man seemed very determined. He paused and said, 10 years ago, this penniless monk made a mistake. Hellion Vivian listened quietly and didn't say anything. The old man's voice was very deep and had a mysterious aura. Back then, I didn't listen to senior brother's advice and got involved in the secular world. I once prophesied that the one who obtained the Phoenix Girl would obtain the world. Unexpectedly, this prophecy put this penniless monk in a dilemma. Phoenix Girl? Hellion Vivian always had a feeling that she was about to hear a shocking secret. Usually, behind this kind of secret there would be a feud involved. Sure enough, the old man continued, after that day, the elders who shouldn't have asked about the affairs of the world found me. They told me that I must find out who was the Phoenix Girl. If this penniless monk didn't say anything, they would capture all the girls of that age and kill them all. Elders? The elders of the 4 great clans? Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Aren't they the guardians of the Dragon War Empire? That was what her memories told her. Beligaju curved his thin lips and hid in the shadows. There was a faint ridicule at the corner of his mouth. The old man said with difficulty, "That's just what it looks like on the surface. If this penniless monk didn't experience that matter, I wouldn't know that they were such people." Actually, if it was just a normal power struggle, it would be fine. Back then, when this poor monk was in the capital, this poor monk discovered a secret related to them. This secret is hard for this poor monk to let go of. Without anyone's permission, they wantonly hunted sacred objects, as if they wanted to do something. This poor monk is a person who practices Buddhism. This poor monk is really worried that the future of the world will fall into the hands of these people. Therefore, this poor monk wishes to ask you to pass this message to the Phoenix Girl, so that she will not become a puppet of the four great families. She is not that stupid. Bailey Jiaju's voice was faint as he opened his mouth. His handsome face always gave people the illusion that a god had descended. The old man glanced in his direction and his eyes suddenly shook. He did not understand why this man was so similar to the statue he saw in the Holy Domain. There were other emotions in his old and chaotic eyes. However, this thought did not come to his mind. He heard Hellion Vivian say, "Great Master, in fact I am Hellion Vivian." She touched the bridge of her nose and an embarrassed smile appeared on her face. "You..." The old man paused and his fingers trembled. "You are? But why did you become like this?" Hellion Vivian knew that the old man was talking about her skin. After thinking for a while, a small tomato appeared in her hand, and then she wiped it across her face. Her astonishingly beautiful face was revealed under the moonlight. "After mother passed away, Madame Su poisoned me," Hellion Vivian sneered. "She was probably worried that I would steal her daughter's limelight. However, it is also thanks to her thoughts. Otherwise, who knows what kind of trouble my face would cause." This was also the reason why Hellion Vivian did not restore her original appearance. The old man sighed. "It is all this poor monk's fault. If it were not for this poor monk, if it were not for Great Master, I am afraid that I would have become that puppet right now." Hellion Wei Wei chuckled as she continued his words. Then with a backhand wipe she turned that little face into a slightly darker color. The old man looked at her and a burst of laughter entered her ears. Fate really makes fools of people. I never thought that I would be able to see the Phoenix Girl again before I passed away. I can make up for my past mistakes. Great Master, you are too serious. The one who made the real mistake is not you. Hellion Vivian's eyes turned cold. The old man looked at the moonlight outside. "It is getting late, Phoenix Girl." Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. She saw the old man move his left hand, and his palm seemed to be filled with endless spiritual energy. It flowed along the lines and all of it flowed into the top of Hellion Vivian's head. Countless moves flashed through Hellion Vivian's mind, and the countless inner chi continuously protected her heart meridian. Hellion Vivian felt as if her whole body was immersed in a warm stream of water. Then her whole body shook and the flowing wind lifted her into the middle of the air. Her white robe fluttered with the wind and the long sleeves floated in the air. With the green robe as the background, clouds and mist appeared, giving people the impression that a fairy had descended. The crime this poor monk committed in the past will probably cause a calamity to the world. Now this poor monk has transferred all of his spiritual energy to you. I only hope that the Phoenix Girl can save the people from the calamity when the world is in chaos. Chapter 237. Hellion Vivian landed on the ground and looked at the old man who was about to be extinguished. "The Fox Valley is about to close. You should leave as soon as possible. With this monk's spiritual energy, your journey will be much easier. Once you leave the Fox Valley, walk towards the entrance of the cave. When you reach the end, you will arrive at the capital. This monk only hopes that everything is not too late." After the old man finished speaking, his head tilted and his entire body seemed to be dehydrated and turned into white powder. In the end, only a glowing relic was left. "Pick up that relic." Unexpectedly, at this time, Yuan Ming actually spoke from the celestial fantasy space. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. "What happened to you before?" The one who just passed away was the only senior monk who was over 100 years old in this world. With my current ability, I can only hide in the celestial fantasy space when I meet such a senior monk. Otherwise, you will be in danger. Yuan Ming explained. Now that he has passed away, the last gift he left for you is this relic. The relic of a senior monk is more precious than a dragon pill. After you eat it, your martial chi will definitely increase greatly. Hellion Vivian's voice was faint. No, I won't eat it. Woman, you are really a strange person. You obviously like to do things by hook or by crook, but you insist on doing things that are inexplicable. Yuan Ming's thin lips curled up sinisterly. Hellion Vivian bent down to pick up the relic and put it on her body. Let's go, we will find a way out. The two of them walked in the dark. Fortunately, they were both nimble people. Otherwise, they would not be able to walk out of the Fox Valley in just a short 2 hours. However, walking out of the Fox Valley did not mean that everything was over. They still had a long way to go. If they continued to walk, it would become very dark. The old man said that this path would lead to the capital, but he did not say where it would lead to. The cave seemed to have no end. It was so dark that one couldn't even see one's fingers in front of one's face. The surroundings were full of unknown plants and there were strange stones everywhere. It was abnormally terrifying. Looking at them in a trance, those stones looked like the faces of demons, the fangs of bloody wolves, and the broken limbs of evil demons. Most of these stones had uneven edges. One could even cruelly say that these stones had thorns, stone thorns. When Hellion Vivian walked in, her clothes had been cut by the sharp stones. She didn't care and only held Beligaju's hand as she walked forward, afraid that he would be cut. However, the sound had already awakened a certain kind of creature in the night. The sound of flapping wings could be heard, and the blood-red dots also began to move rapidly. As they smelled the sweet scent of blood, they became excited. They stared at the intruder with their blood-red eyes, preparing to pounce forward and suck the blood of their prey dry. It was a vampire bat. Hellion Vivian narrowed her eyes and took out the silver knife in her hand, ready to fight at any moment. Stand behind me. Okay. Beligaju took a step back but did not lower his head. Instead, he looked deeply at the young girl standing in front of him. There was a hint of playfulness in the corner of his mouth, and then he narrowed his eyes. The surrounding environment did not affect the darkness and coldness of his body at all. His white robes and green robes were dyed completely black at this moment, perfectly wrapping around his slender figure, making him look even taller and more frightening. His perfect inverted triangular figure supported the ceiling of the cave. His cold handsome face was expressionless, and his pair of eyes were like the cold stars in a winter night, emotionlessly meeting the gazes of those vampire bats. His long and narrow eyes revealed an irresistible darkness and depth, appearing wild and unrestrained, full of evil charm as they shot through the white cloth. Those vampire bats seemed to have sensed something, and they suddenly quieted down, not daring to approach for a long time. Hellion Vivian was still puzzled when Beligaju opened his mouth. Is it because of the spiritual energy that the holy monk just passed on to you? Is that why they don't dare to attack? Probably. Hellion Vivian was skeptical. Spiritual energy had such a big effect? Beligaju's voice was indifferent. That's why we have to hurry up and leave. What if the spiritual energy disappears? Hellion Vivian's fingers tightened and she nimbly walked forward. We have to hurry up and leave. If we don't make it in time for tomorrow's weapons competition, His Highness will definitely kill me. Beligaju paused for a moment, then raised his eyebrows. Kill you? What? I had an agreement with him before, Hellion Vivian said after thinking for a moment. I have to win first place in the martial chi competition. Beligaju smiled faintly. Don't tell me you want to marry him? Hellion Vivian's foot slipped. I guessed right. Beligaju said as they walked. But it's not bad to marry him. Doesn't everyone say that he's the #1 young master in the capital? Hellion Vivian found it a little strange. Her desk mate actually praised others? Well, I didn't marry him for that. Anyway, there was no one here, so Hellion Vivian didn't have so many concerns when she spoke. In addition, talking made her feel more awake and less sleepy. It seemed that there was still a long way to go in the cave, so they had to talk about something to not be bored. Beligaju's eyes narrowed dangerously. Then why did you marry him? Hellion Vivian continued to walk around the vampire bats in front of them. You don't need to know that. In an instant, Beligaju's side face turned cold and his tone was slow. Aren't you afraid that the royal family will know that you married him for other reasons? He already knew. Hellion Vivian said without turning her head. Moreover, he married me for his own reasons. Oh. He wanted to hear what he thought about marrying her. Hellion Vivian raised her eyebrows. Did you forget? Didn't I tell you that the third prince probably likes men? Of course I can't be sure, but his current situation is that he urgently needs a princess to help him. Use you to help him? Beligaju's mocking tone was very obvious. Hellion Vivian of course also heard it. Don't underestimate me, I'm also very awesome. Then what about the wedding night? Beligaju asked casually. Hellion Vivian's thin lips curved. How can there be a wedding night in a contract marriage? What's more, I suspect that the third prince doesn't have feelings for people when he doesn't drink. He looks like a big block of ice from head to toe. I think the third prince will be very, very interested in what you're saying now. Won't have feelings for people. Big ice cube? A good, very good. He had to give her a unique wedding night. Only then did people notice that the black-robed old man's fingernails were not like the fingernails of an ordinary person at all. They were so black that it made people feel cold in their hearts. The shadows wanted to use their own internal energy, but they found that the more injured they were, the faster their martial chi was lost. Old ghost, don't waste time. Quickly get rid of them. The other black-robed old man also walked over. He held the staff in his hand, and when he lowered his head to look at the retired emperor, a trace of evil appeared at the corner of his mouth. The retired emperor was indeed the retired emperor. At this time he could still remain calm in the face of danger. You killed this emperor, but you can't escape. Ah. That eerie laughter sounded again. We never thought of killing you. We only want to replace you. As he spoke, that elder waved his long sleeves, and a few more figures appeared behind him. Those people were about the same size as the ministers who accompanied the retired emperor. Even Eunuch's son, who was standing beside the retired emperor, was found a suitable figure. These figures were holding a human skin mask in their hands. Obviously they wanted to kill all these people and then replace them. Bang. Outside the window the second drum sounded. Just like what the old man said, the martial artists were all busy with the competition, and no one turned around to look in this direction. Even if someone saw it, they would think that the retired emperor was resting or discussing important matters with the ministers. Who would think in this direction? In addition, there was no sound of fighting here, so no one would notice. The sky gradually darkened and the clouds churned and surged. In the cave, Hellion Vivian looked at the mark she had carved before and frowned. Those who didn't know would think that they had encountered a ghost wall. However, Hellion Vivian knew that someone must have set up a trap to prevent the people who came here from leaving so easily. There's something strange about this place. Hellion Vivian stopped in her tracks, and her lazy little face carried a sense of caution that wasn't usually there. The old man didn't say that there would be a trap around the exit. It was obvious that this trap had appeared later. Hellion Vivian used the light of dawn to look to the left of the wall. That's a corpse? Bailey Jiaju also stopped in his tracks. It was not because he had seen anything. After all, his eyes were still covered with a white cloth. It was just that the stench of corpses around him made him furrow his long eyebrows. Hellion Vivian walked over but didn't get too close to the corpse. Instead she squatted on the ground. There seems to be a picture carved here. Beligaju raised his eyebrows and looked in the direction of Hellion Vivian. His expression didn't change at all. Hellion Vivian blew away the dust on the ground. Indeed, there was a picture on the marble. The picture was of the most famous Buddha cutting his flesh to feed the eagle in the Buddhist scriptures. It was just that the flesh here was more like blood. Because there was a small blood trough there. A sentence was carved at the bottom of the mural. If I don't enter hell, who will? Hellion Vivian stared at the blood trough, narrowed her eyes and directly cut with the dagger. Blood flowed down her palm and dripped into the blood trough in the picture. Chapter 239. The blood with spiritual energy surged out as if there was a response. All of them gathered at one point, forming a large Buddhist seal. Faintly, Hellion Wei Wei heard the divine monk's deep voice in her ear for the last time. There was even a hint of a smile in that voice. I told you, if it's you, there's no problem at all. Hellion Vivian still maintained her original posture. Only to hear a crack. With the formation of the Buddhist seal, a gap appeared in the stone wall amid the golden light. The corpse moved naturally and a large piece of light shone in. The two old men in black standing in the room only felt a shock under their feet, and the dust on the roof drifted everywhere. What happened? One of the old men in black looked at the figure behind him. The figure shook his head. The old man in black narrowed his eyes. Is it an earthquake? But they didn't care about such a thing. No matter what it is, let's solve these first. The man holding the stick was obviously more ruthless. The old man in black licked the blood on his fingertips and smiled. What's the hurry? Anyway, these people have been poisoned by our cultivation dissipation powder. Even if they don't die when the time comes, most of their internal strength will be abolished. What's more, they also use their internal strength. Do you want to fight back? Won't the internal organs be broken? Aren't you afraid of being discovered by doing this? The civil official questioned sternly, coughing with blood overflowing from the corner of his mouth. Ah, discovered? The old man seemed to have heard something stupid and laughed mockingly. Now everyone's attention is focused on the martial chi competition. Who knows that we have secretly changed the day? I say there is someone. A clear voice suddenly sounded from behind the crowd, and the cold momentum seemed to come directly from purgatory. The two old men in black robes stiffened at the same time and hurriedly turned around, only to see a white figure standing coldly behind them like a ghost. At the same time, a torrential downpour suddenly surged in from the side of the wall. The black-clothed old man couldn't open his eyes because of the rain. He could only squint his eyes and try his best to distinguish. There was a trace of uncertainty in his voice. Who is it? The white figure slowly walked forward. For some reason, his clothes, which should have been soaked by the rain, were fluttering in the wind, as if he was an emissary from hell. The atmosphere seemed to have suddenly dropped to the freezing point as the person approached. The old man in black gradually felt a heavy sense of oppression. It was as if an invisible hand was squeezing everyone's heart. With a light twist, blood splattered everywhere and life instantly turned into ashes. While she was in a daze, a clear outline of his incomparably cold face was carved out by the light. He leaned against the door frame with a cold expression. His eyes were covered with a white cloth, and his two enviable long legs were slightly crossed. His amber eyes reflected the light. This posture made him look exceptionally handsome, full of a sense of asceticism. The other person's fierce eyes were like a sharp knife against the necks of the two black-clothed elders. The next second their throats would be pierced. The black-clothed old man with a weapon looked at Hellion Vivian in front of him incredulously. Suddenly, his face was shocked and his eyes widened in surprise. Shouldn't this woman be dead? Why was she here? Furthermore, what was with that overpowering spiritual energy? Now Hellion Vivian was like a phoenix reborn from the fire. Her whole body was shining with a light that was difficult to look at directly. It seemed that as long as she waved her wings gently, the flame from hell could burn everything into ashes in an instant. But before she started, Yuan Xiaoming opened his mouth from the fantasy space. Woman, this atmosphere is not right. There seems to be the smell of cultivation dissipation powder in the air. Your future grandfather was poisoned. If you don't treat him, he is likely to die at that age. You should consider whether to take the opportunity to gain some favor in front of your future grandfather, or kill those two people first. Hellion Weiwei was originally full of murderous intent, but the corners of her mouth twitched twice when Yuan Xiaoming called her future grandfather. What the hell is this kind of address? Before Hellion Vivian could make a decision, her arm was pulled over. You go to help the retired emperor heal? The man's voice was very deep, as if he had been accustomed to the commanding tone. Hellion Vivian looked sideways at him. She could only see her deskmate's blindfolded eyes. His face was noble and indifferent, arrogant as before, but cold. The old man in black with a stick narrowed his eyes and looked at the man in front of him. He sneered, "You want to stop the old man by yourself?" While he was speaking, he took out his staff and propped it on the ground. The flames were like a scarlet flame mythical beast that flapped its wings and escaped from the sea of fire. It stared ferociously at Bailey Jiaju and pounced. The flickering shadow in the firelight completely set off his devilish and dark demeanor, just like that of Satan in the dark night. The surrounding temperature was almost at its peak. The scorching heat wave tore Bailey Jiaju's moon-white lapel until it fluttered violently. Looking from afar, it was as if a white lotus in full bloom in the sky was about to be swallowed up by the fire. Yet he only calmly and unhurriedly stretched out his hand and slowly tore off the strip of cloth covering his face, and threw it to the side with the wind. Slowly opening his eyelids, his ink-black pupils seemed to be dyed with a touch of golden light, aiming at the pupils of the red flame beast. The red flame beast suddenly stopped and then stiffened. Then, with a more terrifying momentum than before, it turned to the old man in black who was casting the spell and suddenly opened its bloody mouth. The old man in black didn't even have time to be surprised. Almost in a thousandth of a second, the thin barrier was licked by the monstrous flame and instantly turned into wisps of steam. The flame gradually wrapped around his whole body. The only thing he could feel was the pain of burning flesh. In his ears was a voice that only he could hear, as if it came from hell. "Dare to touch my prey, you should pay the price." Ping. The old man in black fell to the ground. Everyone opened their eyes wide in surprise and looked at Beligaju in disbelief. Especially those ministers, they didn't even dare to believe that there was such an expert in this world. Looking at the clothes he wore, he should be a student of White Academy. Only to be able to destroy the flame in an instant, to kill and take a life with only one move, to destroy a martial cultivator. Was this something an ordinary student could do? This man, who was he? The ministers looked at each other in dismay, full of doubts. Only Hellion Vivian didn't look at this side, but observed everyone's injuries and state. When her hands touched the retired emperor, she found that the cultivation dissipation powder this time was different from the past. Chapter 240. Hellion Vivian wrinkled her eyebrows and went to touch the second person's hand. Bursts of laughter overflowed from the throat of another old man in black, like a ghost. "Ha, don't waste your energy, this is not an ordinary cultivation dissipation powder, there is also a medicine in it, no matter how you try to solve it, you won't be able to solve it." He is not wrong. In addition to the cultivation dissipation powder, there is also the bone eroding powder. The retired emperor's entourage was never short of imperial physicians. When this sentence came out, everyone was shocked. The competition outside the building was still in full swing. But at this time no one was in the mood to watch. No one would have thought that a feast would turn into a disaster. The bone-eroding powder has been a poison that has been lost for many years, colorless and tasteless. For people without martial qi, perhaps it would only make people feel weak all over. But for people with strong martial qi, at the moment of operation the poison would penetrate into the body. If within 3 hours the antidote was not obtained, even if the gods descended, there was no way to reverse the situation. As soon as the imperial physician's voice fell, a minister next to him could not support and fell to the ground, his face blue, not because of anger but a sign of the poison. After using martial qi, the bone-eroding powder would be triggered. Looking at the scene in front of him, the retired emperor also followed the expression on his face. The black-clothed elder laughed out loud again, his voice echoing in the room. "Do you think you can be saved just because 2 little brats came? In this world there are only a few people who can detoxify the bone-eroding poison. I would like to see how long you can hold on." Hearing this, Beligaju's figure moved, his eyes and eyebrows were cold, his sleeves fluttering. The powerful martial qi seemed to hold up an endless dome, the mist surging. Even if you have more martial qi, you can't withstand such consumption. You have talent, but you are too tender, you are only in the water rank. Oh, water can extinguish fire, but it may not be able to extinguish this old man. The old man in black looked and suddenly sneered. While speaking, his attack was fierce and sharp, as if in the next second he could take away Beligaju's name. Beligaju's tone was not the slightest bit chaotic, his voice was faint, but with a trace of cold arrogance. "Oh? Is that so?" The black-clothed old man was so shocked by the imposing manner of this sentence that he stopped moving. In the next moment, the water droplet that had landed on the black-clothed old man's body suddenly blossomed into a flower of ice. Then several sharp ice crystals grew out of the flower of ice. These ice crystals were like madly growing vines, instantly piercing a bloody hole in his body. Beligaju picked him up with one hand and said coldly, "Tell me, where is the antidote?" I didn't expect the retired emperor to have such a person by his side. Old Ghost and I were actually defeated by a brat whose hair is all grown out. However, don't expect this old man to take out the antidote. Before he finished speaking, a trace of dark red blood flowed out of the black-clothed elder's mouth. He actually committed suicide by taking poison. Not only him but even the shadows standing behind him fell down one after another. A burst of fog rose up. Other than the sizzling sound of corroding bones, there were only the faint gasps of the ministers. Hellion Vivian looked at the black-clothed elder who had turned into a pool of blood. Apart from the bones, there was not a single trace left behind. She raised her eyebrows. This method was used to eliminate evidence. It seemed that the other party was very afraid of letting people know where they came from. Retired Emperor, what should we do now? His death meant that the antidote was gone. How could the ministers not be anxious? The retired emperor turned his head and looked at the imperial physician. Minister Chen, do you have a way? The imperial physician shook his head. It was very troublesome. The poison of the bone-eroding powder is too strong, and there is only one chance to detoxify it. If the wrong herb is used, the poisoned person's blood will immediately flow backward and he will die suddenly. Suddenly the room fell into silence. Death was like a pair of invisible hands pinching everyone's throats. At this moment, Hellion Vivian, who had been standing at the side for a long time, opened her mouth and said, "I have a way." Her voice was very clear and faint. However, it made the ministers subconsciously frown. When they looked at Hellion Vivian again, there was a look of inquiry in their eyes. Hellion Vivian curved her thin lips. "What? It seems that you don't believe me." The retired emperor knew her temperament very well. He knew that this girl would never have any misgivings because of the other party's status. He smiled and said, "We are all people who are about to die. What is there to not believe? Girl, if you can cure this bone-eroding poison, I promise that not only me, but all the ministers present will owe you a favor. If you need it in the future, you can use it at any time." With the retired emperor's words, "It will be much more convenient for me to do it." Hellion Vivian moved her eyes and helped Eunuch Sun, who had woken up. Eunuch Sun, go and ask people to prepare 7 big bathtubs. Boil the hot water and prepare a jar of wine for all the ministers." Eunuch Sun was stunned. Bathtub? What did this mean? Was she going to detoxify or bathe? One of the ministers also opened his mouth. His attitude was very good. "This old man doesn't mean that I don't believe in the little girl, but this bone-eroding powder is the most taboo. Even a master who has reached the peak of the gold rank may not be able to force this poison out. If this old man remembers correctly, you shouldn't have any martial chi on you, right? In that case, there is no need to take the risk. This old man is afraid that it will implicate you." General Naylan is right. The imperial doctor coughed lightly and said, "The most terrible thing about bone-eroding powder is that anyone who wants to force the poison out of the poisoned person's body through martial chi will not only fail in the end, but also lead to the poison. So Miss Hellion, you must think twice before you act." Hellion Vivian saw that these old men were good people. She smiled and said, "General Naylan? You can rest assured that I am friends with your family's Yezi. I won't gamble with your life, let alone do things that I am not sure of." The old General Naylan was stunned. He didn't know that his granddaughter who disliked women would have friends. Still too risky. The imperial doctor was also not sure. He only listened to Mrs. Instructions. He is indeed someone who understands medicine. Retired Emperor heard the commotion below. Taking advantage of the time when everyone's attention was on Wei Wei's body, he glanced sideways and quietly asked the youngster standing next to him without uttering a single word, "She can really do it?" Baligaju didn't speak. His fingers leisurely twirled around the white cloth in his hand. The retired emperor was helpless with his beloved grandson. He explained as if admitting defeat, "It's not that this emperor doesn't believe in the princess you chose, but she still doesn't have martial chi on her body." Bailey Jiaju's lips curved into a smile. The words Princess Consort sounded pretty good. "It's because she doesn't have martial chi on her body. So the matter of detoxification, as long as she can do it. Without martial chi, one wouldn't be affected by bone-eroding powder.